has a lot of supplies, and were they to leave it effectively to Iran to get through those supplies, it was described to me as having, a bow and an arch. And if they had those supplies, then they could go for a very, very long time in Iran. And so what the UK felt comfortable with was the US getting rid of those supplies in Iran. And that's what they felt comfortable from coming from the UK basis, but basically nothing else, because they don't feel that there is enough of a legal basis, if one at all, and they don't feel there is a thought-through plan.
A British airbase on Cyprus has come under attack from Iran. So there is no question that it would be within international law for Britain to hit back and try and destroy the same military supplies that America is doing, and yet we're just going to yet again ride on American coattails. I think that's disgraceful.
And Iain, that is the argument being made by some of the opposition parties. So Kemi Badenoch has outlined an argument similar to that, and also Reform UK held a press conference earlier today, and I asked Nigel Farage if he would support seeing British boots on the ground in Iran if this conflict were to escalate to that stage.
I think that would be a huge mistake. And I genuinely believe there has been a vast number of people living in Iran that have wanted to get rid of this regime. They came out in January and they were massacred in, well, we actually believe now possibly in their tens of thousands. This would be a great liberation. I genuinely believe that. I genuinely believe that. But we couldn't put boots on the ground. We've barely got an army left. Even if we wanted to do it. We don't have the operational capacity to attempt anything on that scale that would be meaningful at all. But no, I don't want us to get dragged into it, but there's a heck of a lot we can do to help and support our allies in this.
Nigel Farage speaking there. Aggie, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's talk to Professor Antonios Xanakopoulos, who is Professor of Public International Law at the University of Oxford. Professor, thank you very much for joining us. Sorry we kept you waiting a little bit. The question of international law naturally rears its head on occasions like this. Unless you are a lawyer, it's quite difficult to get your head around what is permissible under international law and not. And I spent quite a long time last night trying to read up on this. But just tell us from your point of view how you interpret the international law in this case, in these attacks on Iran.
Well, I think the position is very clear. There's absolutely no justification for the use of force in this case on the part of the United States and Israel. According to the Charter of the United Nations, according to customary international law, the use of force is only allowed if it is authorized by the Security Council, which it clearly isn't in this case, or if it is in self-defense, for which you require an armed attack occurring. Now, of course, there are interpretations that say this may extend to situations where the armed attack is absolutely imminent. But of course, the question of imminence is a question of fact. But this is interpreted generally very, very narrowly. And in any case, it doesn't appear that here there was any attack imminent on the part of Iran, either against Israel or against the United States. If anything, they were still engaged in negotiations in Oman up until the point where the use of force started. So the position in international law is pretty clear as to there being no justification in this case. And I wonder if you've come across any positions that say this is actually justified under international law and on what basis.
Well, there are quite a few people who think it is justified. But Mark Carney...
Could you name a few? Mark Carney is not a lawyer, though.
No, nor am I. Nor am I, which is why I asked you the question. But can you name how many wars have been basically given approval by the United Nations since 1949?
Oh, very many. Since 1945, I think. Fine.
3.
Oh, no, you're very wrong. We had authorizations for the use of force in the former Yugoslavia. We've had authorization for the use of force in Libya. We've had authorization for the use of force in Kuwait, and we've had more limited authorizations for the use of force in all sorts of other situations.
The overwhelming majority of military attacks and wars have come without the auspices of the United Nations.
But they were justified as self-defense, even if they were wrong. At least they were justified on this. Well,
surely there is an argument here about self-defense, isn't there? Given that over the years,
no Article 51 letter has come into the Security Council as far as I'm concerned. If somebody is invoking the right to use force in self-defense, even Putin did that in the case of attacking Ukraine, sends an Article 51 letter to the Security Council where they explain why they're using force in self-defense. In this particular case, no such letter has come in. And as far as I've heard on the part of the US government, there has been very little attempt at justification of this, just like as there has been very little attempt at justification of the use of force in Venezuela, which is equally unlawful, just taking the last.
So you don't believe that Iran has been a clear and present danger to both the United States and Israel over the years?
A clear and present danger is not the standard of the law. The standard of the law, in accordance with Article 51 of the UN Charter, is that a state has the right to use force in individual or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs. That is what the letter of the law says. Now, we can interpret occurs more broadly as an attack being imminent, which means the process, the sequence of events that will inevitably lead to an armed attack unless there is an interception has been put in motion. But it doesn't say you are allowed to bomb whoever is a clear and present danger, because there's all sorts of states that are clear and present dangers for all sorts of other states, whether you take Greece and Turkey or you take, I don't know, whatever other situation. You could say Russia, US. I mean, is not Russia a clear and present danger to the US? They're not bombing them. I mean, it has been a clear and present danger for ages. How long has it had nuclear weapons aimed at the US? So if the standard is clear and present danger, which is not the standard of the law, then we'd basically be in a
So you don't believe that Iran has been a clear and present danger to Israel over the last 12 months, for example?
I've answered this. It's not, you're asking me if I believe. It's not what I believe. If you're asking me what the standard of the law is, the standard of the law is not a clear and present danger.
Well, sometimes the law is an ass, isn't it?
Well, I mean, then that's, if you're welcome to that position if that's what you feel. But of course, if you're asking me what the standard of the law is, then I have to tell you what the standard of the law is. Now, whether we can sit here and criticize it, we can do that if you wish. But let's separate the two questions, one from the other. So if you would rather take this up on policy, I mean, I can do that. I have no special expertise on policy. My expertise is on the law.
A lot of people, I think, in Iran, not everybody, but I think a lot of the population, particularly those who supported the January protests, they will take the view that the law international law hasn't protected them over the years. And maybe we should start thinking about people rather than laws.
I mean, yes, of course we could do that. But of course, international law is made by states and it is meant to be there to protect states, not necessarily directly the people. That's, again, a criticism that you can level. But that has to do with how the system is structured. Because, of course, we're talking about the protection of people. Then you could take up the issue that you have with Iran with all sorts of other states around the world, which the United States is not currently bombing, where people are suffering. So, you know, it becomes a little bit more complicated. So if you want to have a law that protects people, that's fine. But then you would have to be intervening to protect the people everywhere, which is not, of course, what the United States is doing, or anybody else for that matter. So international law, the characteristic is particularly this, that it has been created by states. The states are the lawmakers. The states are the primary subjects of that law. And the law is created to protect them, in particular from intervention and from the use of force. With respect to people, there are human rights obligations that apply. When those human rights obligations are being violated, there are all sorts of reactions that states can take. But these do not include the use of armed force. So this kind of attempt of bombing from high altitude to protect human rights has not served us very well. It has been taken in the past. It hasn't served us very well. Again, there we could stray into question of policies, Mr. Dale. But if the previous history is anything to go by, then high altitude bombing hasn't really protected human rights.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. That's Professor Antonios Sannikopoulos, Professor of Public International Law at the University of Oxford. You know, I'm not advocating that anybody should go deliberately against international law, but sometimes I think particularly in matters of self-defence, I do think that individual countries are allowed to make sure that attack is maybe take preemptive action to prevent an attack. And I think that is what Donald Trump would argue that he's doing here. I think there is a clear and present danger to Israel. We've seen it over the past, decades with Iran funding Hezbollah and Hamas to send rockets into Israel and kill people. I think Israel is completely justified. But even I would accept that there is a debate over whether the American action is, even though I would support it. It's 22 minutes past 7.
conflict in the Middle East. Follow live on LBC. Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
24 minutes past 7. Caroline says, Iain, I do not agree with your introduction. This war is not lawful and the fallout economically and globally will be a disaster. You cannot bomb your way into regime change. There is also no planned endgame. First of all, Caroline, you're falling into the trap of pretending to be an expert on international law. So you don't know if it's lawful or not. That hasn't been tested. You're making assertions about the fallout economically. I accept that oil prices have gone up 7% today, so there may well be an effect on inflation. True, that may well happen. You cannot bomb your way into regime change. Well, in theory, you're right. I'm sure there are examples where that has happened. You say there is also no planned endgame. Well, there may be. You just don't know about it. I mean, that's my fear, that there isn't any planned endgame, because we have seen where that leads in the past. But just because it happened in Libya, just because it happened in Iraq, does not mean that it would have to happen in Iran. I accept that Donald Trump has rolled the dice. He's thrown his cards up in the air and wants to see where they land. That is what he does. I accept that that is a huge risk. But we are where we are. There is no going back. It's happened. So we now, therefore, have to make the best of it, do we not? Tom is in Maidstone. Hello, Tom.
Hi, Tom. Well, Tom, that's me. Iain, good evening.
You'd be amazed how many people do that, Tom.
Yeah, I believe you. I believe it. Iain, I heard the Prime Minister speak earlier, and he said we've learned the lessons from Iraq. And here's the question. Iraq was lawful, but it was wrong. Everyone can see that it was wrong. And if you park the Israelis for a second, like, why can't this be unlawful? But it's going to be just if you look at what happened in Iran for the Iranian people over the last few months. I just feel that there's a lack of action, any action, from the UK government. I mean, I don't know what else he's waiting to happen before they respond. Today, it was a drone attack on a RAF airbase. Sir Richard, I forgot his surname, ex-head of MI6, have confirmed that they foiled over the years multiple Iranian attack on British soil. What else needs to happen? When is the wake-up call?
Well, I agree with you. I mean, the fact is, this attack on RAF Akrotiri, that happened after Keir Starmer said yesterday that they would, because I think a lot of people assumed that his announcement last night was in response to it, but it wasn't actually. So to my mind, if we have come under attack, therefore it is up to Britain to try and stop the attacks at source and bomb the hell out of any military base that the Iraqis are launching these drones or missiles from.
And I think, never mind joining in activeness. I mean, okay, we can make this argument, but at the very least, they asked to use the air bases. The air bases are there for a reason, clearly to protect British interests as well. So why not let them?
Well, Look, I agree with you. Margaret Thatcher had
Thank
this
you.
choice to make in Libya in 1986, and she chose to allow the Americans to take off from British air bases, and quite right too. The French and the Spanish wouldn't allow them to, so these planes had to go all the way around the Iberian Peninsula to get to Libya. I think that was a wholly justified attack. I'm not sure that was referred to the United Nations. In fact, I'm pretty sure it wasn't. I don't think that we can let the United Nations be the arbiters of British, Israeli or American or indeed any country's self-interest. You have to be allowed to make a preemptive attack if you feel that your country is under threat. And I hear what everyone says about international law, but so many times in our history we let the dictators ignore international law at their will, and then we have human rights lawyers like the Attorney General Richard Herman and Keir Starmer essentially hiding behind it, and I think that's shameful. Tom, thank you. Let's go to Ashley, who's a first-time caller in Wakefield. Hello, Ashley.
Hi, Ian. You okay?
Yes, thank you. What would you like to say?
I'd like to say, I've come at this from an angle where my partner is Iranian, and most of the people that I know through her are Iranian, and the narrative at the minute seems to be very much on the side of that, people don't agree with this, and all I can see on my side is just pure happiness, pure joy at this taking place. I actually have one of my partner's friends. Her mother was killed in the last revolution in the Women Life Freedom movement. She's quite a prominent figurehead in the Iranian diaspora within the UK. I won't name any names because she's actually, she's on a watch list essentially. But I think that I'm quite disturbed at what I'm seeing in the news, what I'm seeing on social media. It seems almost like the crazy left-wing individuals in the UK at the minute, they're sort of joining their hatred for imperialism, and for Israel. It seems to be taking precedent over innocent lives in Iran. And at the moment we're seeing a lot of people sort of coming out of the woodwork, saying, all these innocent lives have been lost. Like, for instance, there's a lot of talk about the school that's been apparently bombed by Israel and the US, although there's no evidence for that.
Well, there is evidence. It was bombed. I think it was an Israeli bomb. But what the likes of Owen Jones are saying is that was a deliberate bombing of a school. What he fails to mention is that school is next door to an Iranian barracks.
That's correct. If there is proof now that it was an Israeli missile, then I apologise. But as we've seen in the past with I don't know if you remember the plane, the Ukrainian Airlines plane that was shot down by the Iranian missile systems quite a few years ago now. The initial narrative around that when that happened was that was an airline fault or a plane fault, and then it came out a few weeks later. Actually, it was a rogue missile that took the plane down, and there's a belief especially amongst my Iranian friends, that this is the propaganda machine of Iran. Yet again, sort of saying that this was done by the Israelis when actually it was a rogue missile from one of their from the base, like you say, that is directly next to that school. And obviously, if we're looking at the capabilities that each nation has, the American strikes and the Israeli strikes, they're very precision-based. The weaponry that they use is probably far more advanced than the weaponry that the Iranians use. So, my belief is that's probably something that's being carried out by Iran. Whether that will come out in due course, I don't know. But if we were to move to the international, I know you've just been talking about international law. Well, my belief is that how do you go against a nation that has complete disregard for international law? It's almost like the analogy I would use is it's like you're playing a football match and there's two teams and one team's not playing by the rules, the other one is, but the other team's put 7 goals past you and they're ultimately going to win the match. I think that it depends on the circumstances, and when you've got a country like Iran and a regime that's been funding God knows how many proxies for so long, there comes a point where, unfortunately, you have to disregard international law. And I think Keir Starmer, as you say, is hiding behind that veil because that's his remit, isn't it? That's his business. A previous barrister, a human rights lawyer. This is what he does. And I think he's losing a lot of respect at the minute, more than if that's possible. And I think I'm very happy about what's happening at the minute. I don't know where it's going to end, and I think everybody that I know from the Iranian diaspora is concerned about the plan for the day after tomorrow. But right now, they're just absolutely ecstatic that the Ayatollah has gone, and a lot of his henchmen.
I mean, my Instagram feed is full of videos of Iranians in Britain celebrating the demise of the Ayatollah. And it's actually quite emotional watching their reaction in many ways. Ashley, thank you. Dan says, Iain, are you defending the bombing of those children? No, of course I'm not. I mean, how ridiculous. But we all know that in war, I mean, missiles do go off course sometimes. And even though most of the time it is real precision bombing, I mean, anyone that believes that either the Americans or the Israelis would deliberately bomb a school with 85 children and it needs their head read, they really need to examine their motives. It's quite clear what happened here, and shame on people like Owen Jones who trying to insinuate that it was deliberate. 0345 6060 973. Should Keir Starmer have given the Americans permission right from the get-go to use British bases? I mean, the ironic thing is that there are no American planes at RAF Airford at the moment, so it's almost immaterial. But it just shows how important Diego Garcia is as a strategic base. We'll hear from Natasha Clark, our political editor, as to how Shabana Mahmood is going to change our immigration system to reduce the number of asylum seekers coming to this country. That's the aim anyway. That's next, plus more of your calls. 7:33 on LBC. Matt Hewitt has the news headlines.
The Middle East is coming to terms with a third day of missile strikes and drone attacks. The US has struck Tehran, while Israel has pounded Iranian-backed Hezbollah targets in Lebanon. Donald Trump's insisting America's operations will continue with full force until its aims are achieved. He suggested the war could last 4 or 5 weeks. Tehran's confirmed it will continue with its strikes and won't negotiate with the US. Sir Keir Starmer's brushed off criticism from the President of the US that he was too slow in approving the use of the Diego Garcia base in the Chagos Islands to launch strikes. The Prime Minister told MPs it was his duty to judge what's in Britain's national interest. He also stressed all options would be explored to get UK nationals stuck in the Middle East home as swiftly and safely as possible. LBC weather. Rain slowly pushing east this evening, gradually weakening. Clear spells at first in the east. Cold and frosty in the north. Lows between -2 and 8 Celsius.
LBC.
At Amazon.
Dale. Text 84850. This is LBC.
7:36 on LBC. You may remember, I think it was last week, or was it the week before, that we talked to Natasha Clark, our political editor, and she was very strangely in Denmark. Well, it's all become clear today as to why she was there, but she's here now. Why were you there?
So, Iain, yes, I went with the Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood to Copenhagen. And you'll remember at the end of last year, she outlined some changes to the immigration system that she wanted to see. And some of that inspiration was taken, she says, from Denmark, which it's fair to say has quite a hard-line approach to migration as those Scandinavian nations go. And she's taken lots of tips back home with her that she hopes she can implement. So we had a really interesting trip. We looked around an asylum processing centre, which interestingly is run by their version of the Red Cross rather than sort of the mighty or the sort of, contractors that we have. We also looked around a sort of processing and removal centres, so the places where people are taken before they're deported. They're not nice places, as you'd probably expect them to be. And the aim is there that you're sort of trying to de-incentivise the system and make it less attractive for people to want to come to Denmark in the first place and fearing that they might not face a nice sort of cushy hotel, as indeed some migrants do face in the United Kingdom. But the main principle that she is implementing from today is that she wants to see refugee status become temporary rather than a permanent route to citizenship.
This is a big problem for us. We've got a broken asylum system and we have a legal migration system that's been open to unacceptable levels of abuse. So I've got to get both of these things into control again to give the public confidence that the state can run its own border.
And I sat down with her and talked about some of these immigration changes and sort of the things that she would like to see from Denmark. And in Denmark, she told me that essentially she was quite interested in the idea that they pay their migrants, their failed asylum seekers, I should say, quite a lot of money in order to leave the country. She said that she wanted to up the amount. So currently we pay people up to £3,000 in order to leave. But she says that she wants to see that Danish model implemented, which could be up to £30,000.
I know it sort of sticks in your craw, basically, to think that you're going to pay people who've come to your country illegally to leave and go back to their home country. To house somebody in asylum accommodation in a hotel, it costs £53,000 a year per person. Paying more than what we currently do is still going to be considerably less than what we're spending on these people staying in asylum hotels. Well, look, I haven't made any final decisions on what the right sum and the right sort of package will be for our country.
But it could be up to £30,000.
It will be more than what we currently offer.
That was Shabana Mahmood speaking to me in Denmark.
I mean, have I got this right?
It's quite a lot of money, isn't it?
Us as taxpayers are going to pay people £30,000 to leave the country. Now, I remember in the 1980s, there were some people on the extreme right of British politics who wanted a scheme of voluntary repatriation for people who've come here legally, and they would have then been paid I don't know how much to go back home. I mean, I find it incredible that a Labour Home Secretary would be proposing this.
Yeah, I mean, look, she's proposing it because she thinks it's going to save the taxpayer money overall. So the government's argument on this is very interesting. They say that basically you are not rewarded if you comply with the system or if you do. So essentially, say you are essentially going to be deported anyway, you failed your asylum application and you're going to be going home. Essentially, what Shabana Mahmood thinks people are doing is essentially dragging their feet and staying in taxpayer-funded hotels for longer, which costs them more money down the line. So she is saying, well, if we can pay these people up front a sum which makes it attractive to go home, to comply with the system, and then to go home earlier, it is something that is worth doing. And obviously we know how much Britain is spending on taxpayer-funded hotels for people at the moment, and we know how long it takes these people to go through the system. So
it could be a pull factor, couldn't it? I mean, you could have somebody deported having trousered £30,000, and then 6 months later, suddenly they appear again and get another £30,000.
Completely agree. And I think it would have to be a bit like the one in, one out system where they're taking fingerprints or they're taking some form of documentation to make sure that that doesn't happen. But yes, you're completely right. I think some critics will think this is actually quite a generous approach. But if she can prove that it will save taxpayers money, that's obviously going to be key. And we know that some of these hotels that people are staying at is very pricey. That's why the government says they want to put them in these sort of larger scale army style sites instead, which they say will not be a pull factor rather than the hotels that some people are getting at the moment. While I was in Denmark, I had the opportunity to speak with the Danish immigration minister. It's fair to say they are very, very hard line as a government, and he said some things that I don't think any politician in the UK would ever get away with saying without a significant backlash. He told me when I was asking him about their migration policies that he didn't want to see children in Denmark growing up thinking that they were living in a part of the Middle East. And he also said that Denmark is content with sending people back to Syria.
We are very keen on expelling people and sending more people back. That is, that we don't want parallel societies, we won't accept them, and we won't accept that norms of imams or anyone else try to dominate areas of Denmark. They don't grow up in a part of Denmark which might as well could have been a part of the greater Middle East.
So some quite extreme language there from him. And interestingly, their government has had quite a lot of success in driving down their asylum rates. But we should point out, Ian, that it is a very, very different nation. It's a much smaller nation. It's only got 6 million people that live there compared to our 70 million people. Their asylum claims last year were 1,900. That's the amount of people that would come over in a small boat.
101,000, weren't they?
I'm not sure exactly the number. It was more than 45,000 over in a small boat.
Yeah, but for asylum applications were, I think, over 100,000.
Yeah, so it's hard to compare the two systems, but it really interesting language coming out of them. And obviously Shabana Mahmood will be bringing that forward this week. We expect her to be making a speech on Thursday.
Right, thank you very much indeed. That's Natasha Clark, our political editor. Let's go back to your calls on the action against Iran. Pavan is in Coventry. Hello, Pavan.
Good evening, Ian. Just before I get on to my main point, just wanted to add, I'm so glad you said it, because I'm sick and tired when these types of incidents occur, and unfortunately, schools and hospitals, and I give most countries the benefit of that in this regard, are bombed. People use that as political capital, the pathos argument, to suggest that this was somehow deliberate in order to try to make the broader point. I think that's disingenuous, it's unpalatable, and whenever it's done, whether it's the right or the left, we should call it out because it's ridiculous. That shouldn't be used. Unfortunately, when you have these types of incidents, as history shows, things happen. Civilians unfortunately die. Nobody is targeting them necessarily, but the way that it's used, I frankly think it's reprehensible.
And also, just as a side issue to that, people are effectively trying to insinuate that America and Israel are the immoral ones here. Whereas if you look at where the Iranians are sending their drones and their missiles, they are sending them deliberately into residential areas. Now, Israel and America are not doing that in Iran. They are trying as far as is possible to hit military targets, and occasionally there's a bomb that goes astray, and that is hugely regrettable. But people ought to actually look into the circumstances of these things rather than immediately thinking the worst.
Well, that's the thing, but, just on that, but I mean, the American so-called friendly fire is something that we've had throughout history. So it's not as though, things don't go wrong. But the broader point, Ian, is, and I agree with you here with what you said about Starmer. And yes, and you're right, by the way, it is possible to argue legally either side, depending on, what you want to do. People can hide behind international law. They can turn around and they can embrace it. But the reality is any invasion of any country, although it's justifiable, potentially is a breach of international law if we're going to go to first principles. But the thing that I find really disconcerting about Starmer is he was pretty indecisive, pretty expected, to be honest, but he could have turned around if he wanted to look for a potential, nuanced position and said, well, we don't support it in terms of actively, but we're still going to allow an ally to use them. But of course, the problem there would be, and this is where I think there's a huge issue, he knows the backlash from within his party, from people who are either on the left or people who have some sympathy with the Iranian regime or whatever else Jeremy Corbyn used to do. There will be a backlash. So as far as I'm concerned, and we are surmising here, this was a political decision made, and he was happy and able to turn around and hide behind the international law. And that, for me, is the unacceptable part. You've got to own these decisions. Now, it's all well and good for him coming out today and making that response, which almost Trump and the Americans, forced out of him because of the way that the rhetoric that was going on and what the American news networks have been reporting. But the reality of the situation was, if it had taken a position to start with, a decisive one, either or, it's justifiable. But it's yet further evidence that this guy, and whatever, I don't hide my political leanings. They're certainly not with Labour. But at the end of the day, he is our Prime Minister. He does represent us. And I just think every single time we have a situation where we have to put either British national interest first or any British interest, this man just cowers away. And as far as your professor, which is what got me calling, from my old university, saying that, this was immoral, anything else. Well, hold on a second. There's plenty of countries, unfortunately, where these things are going on, but most of them aren't involved in active campaigns to destabilise and unsettle our societies and our groups. And
but according to him, that doesn't matter in international law.
Yeah, but this is the thing. You can't just use international law as an isolated example just to suit your agenda, because at the end of the day, if you're going to use international law, it has to blend in with everything else. For example, and one of your earlier contributors suggested this, isn't it rich, for example, that from an international law perspective, it's arguable that, we shouldn't have gone in, or sorry, the Americans shouldn't have gone in, but at the same time, international law puts the groups like the Iranians and others at the head of United Nations groups for women when we know what goes on. And the critical thing there, Ian, is that this isn't just one group or other saying it. These are consistent groups across the globe who are saying what's going on, the lack of human rights, the way that they unfortunately are putting to death people simply for being homosexual, whatever. We all know that. And that's where I think it's really, really difficult to try to reconcile that position, that this country, along with probably Pakistan, are the two major sponsors of terrorism and terrorist cells across the world. And if anybody is doing anything to try to at least diminish that or eradicate it, they should be applauded. I'm not particularly a Trump fan. I'm not a Trump detractor. But the bottom line is, as I said at the outset, if he was doing this, Starmer could have taken that position, but instead, as you said, what did he do? Reverted to type, fence sitter, supine, because the man just can't make a decision. As Kemi Badenoch said in PMQs last week, it's all well and good saying I never lose a fight, but if you never enter the ring, you're clearly not going to lose a fight.
You know what, Pavan? Should we just end the programme here? Because you've kind of said it all. Thank you very much. What an absolutely brilliant call. Let me tell you who's on Cross Question at 8. Tom Hayes, Labour MP for Bournemouth East. Sir Bernard Jenkin, Conservative MP for Harwich and North Essex. Zoe Grunwald, who is a political journalist, the Westminster editor of the website The Load. And Reform UK member of the London Assembly, Alex Wilson. They'll be here to answer your questions from 8. Just on what Pavan was saying there, I was watching a video over the weekend of one of these mad Iranian mullahs explaining to us his views on women. It was quite an education, because you see, I didn't realise that women were actually the chattels of men, and that they're actually animals, and they only exist in human form for men's pleasure. That is what these Iranian theocrats actually believe. And yet you have these feminist groups marching against a war in Iran, as if they think that America is the worst place to live than Iran. Tell you what, go and live in Iran and see what it's like. 7:48.
This is LBC. Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
7:51. Let's go to David, who's a first-time caller in Stroud in Gloucestershire. Hello, David.
Hello, Ian. What a pleasure to speak to you, sir.
Well, and you.
Thank you.
I think it'll be a pleasure.
Well, hopefully. Everybody's banging on about international law and how important it is, but who enforces it? Who? Okay, let's accept that the Americans have broken international law. So what? What's going to happen?
Well, the International Court of Justice, I think, is the one.
They've done a blinding job with Putin, haven't they? And everybody else has broken it. I mean, the only people that can enforce the international law, the big enough, the country that's big enough with the military, etc., is the Americans. And they're the ones that are being accused of breaking it. And
also, while I think of it, I'm pretty sure the Americans aren't members of the ICJ. So
there you are then.
Because people always used to bang on, whenever I did phone-ins on Iraq, and people would say, well, Tony Blair and George Bush, they're war criminals. And I would say, well, can you tell me which law that they've broken? And then, of course, people splutter because they think that they're expert lawyers when actually they know not very much. I nearly said something else there.
Your man you had on earlier on, who was quite adamant that America have breached international law, well, let's accept that they have. What? Now what? What's he going to do? He's going to stand
there are no sanctions apart from, I suppose, you can say, well, if they have been guilty of breaching it, they've brought international law into disrepute, so fewer people will abide by it in the future.
As they are at the moment. I mean, it's just nonsense. It's just a talking shop for highly paid lawyers, I think, which is what we're finding with Starmer.
Yeah. Thank you very much, David, for your first time call. We look forward to the second time call. Before we come back to your calls, I want to have a little look at what the economic effects of this war might be and how that might affect us in this country. Charlie Ambler joins me, Co-Chief Investment Officer of the wealth management company Saltus. Charlie, very good evening to you. Now, oil prices have gone up. Gas prices inevitably have jumped today. In fact, I think the gas prices have gone up way more than oil. So what effect will that have on the UK?
Oh, thank you for having me. So typically what happens in a scenario like this is the oil price will increase as conflict emerges. And a fair amount of that can be because of expectations rather than actually anything that's happening on the ground. But what we've seen is a large jump. Over the weekend, prices went from around 70 up to 80. They've stabilised a bit, and we'd expect probably to see that come through in pump prices, usually 1-2 weeks in time.
And presumably, therefore, the effect on inflation in this country might be reasonably significant, but that will take a little time to come through.
Yeah, inflation numbers are particularly lagged. So most of it's reported 12 months in arrears. That is a frustration, obviously, for a central bank that has been trying to tackle inflation for quite a while. Raising interest rates at this point probably wouldn't do too much. This is supply push inflation rather than demand-led inflation, where interest rates really do help.
So in terms of the cost of living crisis, it's not going to do much, particularly if it prevents interest rates from coming down for a bit.
Yeah, exactly. It would certainly be a frustration if you see increase in sort of forecourt prices and petrol prices and energy prices, which, if this is a prolonged affair, we could see sort of drift into food prices, production costs, transport costs, heating, manufacturing. However, it's still very early days.
Well, indeed. And I mean, if it really becomes a lot worse and say a lot of the Middle Eastern oil fields were disrupted, well, I think a 10% jump in the price of oil would be a drop in the ocean, wouldn't it? Charlie, thank you very much indeed. That's Charlie Ambler from the wealth management company Saltus. Right, Nick is a first-time caller in Southwark. Nick, very good evening.
Hi, Ian. In Southwark, I thought you said Suffolk. Southwark in London. A couple of points. First of all, I'm not a supporter by any means of the Iran regime. It's a horrifying situation there. But if we abandon international law, what sort of world are we going to live in? I mean, everybody's talking about it in kind of one dimension. If we completely abandon in the West, what happens to the rest of the world? The rest of the world would just say, well, we'll not take any pay any attention to international law either. And then what sort of a world are you going to live in?
You could argue that ship has already sailed.
Well, yes, in some ways, but we do have, as you've pointed out, we do have an international court. We do have sanctions. We do have people who are brought to the court. I mean, think back to the Balkan Wars. People ended up being, brought to justice. So maybe Putin will someday be in court. But that's one point I wanted to make. The other one I wanted to make was and the real reason I found was in these wars, and I remember the Iraq War pretty well, there was the same fetishization of high-tech weapons, the same kind of armchair generals pontificating, and all the time, like I just read, 52 people just now have been killed in Lebanon by Israel. We so easily slip into this mindset where we somehow can just accept people being literally blown to bits.
Well, hang on a second, because I think one of the things that hasn't really been told properly today, and I was watching the BBC News at lunchtime and they didn't really explain this properly, was that the Israeli attacks on Hezbollah in Lebanon were as a direct result of Hezbollah attacking Israel. So,
yeah, I know.
What would you expect them to do?
I'm not arguing against it, but the point I'm trying to take a point of view that zooms out a little further from this. I just think the reality of bodies blown to bits is somewhat ignored in these conversations, and I just think we need to remind ourselves as human beings that we're talking about people literally being blown to bits, men, women, and children.
Yeah, as has happened in every war since time immemorial.
Yes,
that's not to say it's right, but it's not exactly unusual.
Well, no, of course it's not. I mean, I'm not stupid.
No, I wasn't suggesting that you were stupid.
Of course it is, but I thought we were hopefully in the 21st century, all the rhetoric around the Millennium was hopefully we're going to live in a new century, but we just seem to be slipping back into the same old patterns, and even worse, the abandonment of possibly of international law could make it even worse. And the bodies pile up. And when do we say enough? That's what I'm concerned about.
I think that Israel and America have said to the Iranians, enough. We're not going to put up with you killing 50,000 of your own people in protests. We're not going to put up with you launching terror attacks all over the world. So, I mean, sometimes countries do have to stand up for what is right. And I'd like to think that is what's motivating Donald Trump and Netanyahu here.
I accept that. But, except that Trump has proven over and over again that he wants to circumvent all these international organizations, the UN and so on. So he's creating a very dangerous world, I think, with this kind of this kind of on our terms, America first kind of military action. He's creating circumstances that are going to have a lot of blowback, I think, for America. And we seem to have forgotten what happened in Iraq. And okay, it's not the same situation, but anybody who knows anything about war will tell you that, stepping into a war and having, as Hegseth is claiming tonight, this very kind of precise, organized way, and it's all going to be very clean and blah, blah, blah. Anybody who knows about war knows that that's not the reality, that everything can spiral out of control very quickly. And we're already beginning to see that in the Middle East now. Nobody knows what's going to happen. So the idea that somehow all of this is just a plan by America and it's all going to end up very well for the Iranians and everybody else, it just seems to me to be pie in the sky.
Nick, thank you very much indeed. Right, well, we're going to come back to Iran after 9. We've got two experts coming into the studio, and it's your chance to ask them your questions. Because, look, I've got plenty of questions I'd like to ask them. I don't think anybody here listening is necessarily an expert on Iran. I guess you are if you come from there. But we have got an Iranian journalist coming in and also somebody with a military background. So they'll be here to answer your questions after 9. In the meantime, it's Cross Question. We have Labour MP for Bournemouth East, Tom Hayes, Sabrina Jenkin, Conservative MP for Harwich and North Essex, Zoe Grunewald, who is political journalist, editor of the Lead website, and Alex Wilson, Reform UK member of the London Assembly. They're waiting for your calls right now.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, the Prime Minister's defended the decision not to join US strikes on Iran following criticism from Donald Trump. The US President says he's disappointed Sir Keir Starmer took far too long to allow the use of British bases. Sir Grant Shapps, the former Defence Secretary, told LBC the UK government should have shown full support.
This is a regime that means nothing but harm to us. They've literally been shooting at us via their proxies, the Houthis, in the Red Sea. I mean, what more evidence do we need that international law was broken by them?
Meanwhile, Donald Trump says operations against Iran are likely to last 4 to 5 weeks, but says he's prepared to go far longer. A senior figure in Tehran says it won't negotiate with the US and will continue with the counterattacks. Well, oil prices have surged as the conflict disrupts supply. There's been a big rise in the price of natural gas as Qatar halts production. In other news, Brewdog will shut 38 bars with the loss of nearly 500 jobs. Administrators say they're not included in a rescue deal. And a man's been arrested after another man was stabbed in the west of Edinburgh. Schools were closed as a precaution in Calder this morning. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 130 points at 10,780. The pound buys $1.34 and €1.14. LBC weather, rain slowly pushing eastwards this evening, gradually weakening, lows of between -3 and 8 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 2 minutes past 8 on LBC. I'm Iain Dale. Welcome to Monday's Cross Question. It's not as if we haven't got a lot to talk about tonight, is it? Right, Tom Hayes is to my left, Labour MP for Bournemouth East. Next to him, Sir Bernard Jenkin, Conservative MP for Harwich and North Essex. To my right, Zoe Grunewald, who is a political journalist and the Westminster editor of the website The Lead. And Alex Wilson, next to her, is Reform UK member of the London Assembly. They are here to answer your calls on 0345 6060 973. And don't forget, you can watch us on Global Player, the LBC app and the LBC YouTube channel.
Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Cross Question. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app. This is LBC.
Right, we have a call from Sarah, who is in Hampstead. Hello, Sarah.
Hi, Ian.
Hi, what would you like to ask?
My question relates to your previous hour, really. Last year, J.D. Vance referred to our country as a random country, and he dismissed the war debt that we had in Afghanistan and Iraq when we blindly followed America into those conflicts. Trump's been threatening the EU with his threats over Greenland, and this particular intervention in Iran, he claimed it's about the nuclear regime when he said he's obliterated it. And then it's about regime change, but then it's not really. And then it's also about the missiles. So my question is, why on earth would we blindly follow America into this conflict when they haven't proven to be our steadfast ally with those 3 instances that I've just mentioned?
OK. Sir Bernard Jenkin.
Well, I don't think we blindly do anything. But in this case, it was very odd for the Prime Minister not to give support to the United States when we're pleading for the United States support in Ukraine with regard to Russia. And we should be working as partners. And within a few hours, it was disproved, the idea that Iran was not a threat to the UK, because Iran opened fire on UK bases and UK citizens, and we were immediately drawn into the conflict as a consequence. The idea that Iran, where the crowds openly shout death to Britain and they want to annihilate the state of Israel, is not also a threat to our national security, is a rather naive view of international law. And I don't think the Prime Minister should have adopted that view.
OK, Zoe?
But my question for you would be, at that initial point, do you believe that the US and Israel had a legal basis for striking Iran?
Well, even the Prime Minister hasn't said that they didn't.
But do you believe they did?
I think they did have.
But if he doesn't know for sure, should he do that?
Israel certainly had a legal basis because they are under threat of annihilation by Iran. Iran has declared that it is their objective to annihilate. They say death to all Jews.
Yeah, but as we know...
And they were seeking to acquire nuclear weapons, and they'd attacked Iran before, and they'd backed all the terrorists in the region. How can you possibly say they weren't a threat to Israel?
Of course they were a threat, but it has to be an immediate threat. This is why Keir Starmer wanted to wait to get the legal advice, and that is vitally important. If we have states, like Donald Trump did, going into Venezuela, kidnapping Maduro, and then acting as if the world stage is just his playpen where he could ignore international law, ignore rules, ignore values, that is not something that we should blindly follow. We need to wait for the legal guidance. We need to make sure everything we do is by the book. And I think it's absolutely right that the UK didn't blindly move in. And I would say I would be worried now, particularly about us allowing the US to use these bases, because we cannot trust Donald Trump. We don't know what he's going to do next. I think it's the same with Netanyahu. These are two bedfellows that I think we should stay well clear of. And I think we should be looking to our allies in Europe for strengthening our security.
What about our allies in Australia and Canada that instantly backed this as a perfectly legal attack?
But they didn't have military bases and assets in the immediate region, which the US were going to call on those countries to use. If the UK were to immediately say that they think an offensive war...
This is the voice of Tom Hayes, by the way.
Hello. I've never had that described before. Canada and Australia don't have bases in the immediate region, which if
so they even have less of an interest than us
to this mission means they would therefore have had to use those bases for offensive operations. I think what we've seen here with Kemi Badenoch is that she's put country behind party. If you want the definition of blindly following the US, this is a perfect example. With Kemi Badenoch, what she wanted to do was say that she would have, as Prime Minister, backed President Donald Trump in launching an offensive mission, whether it was legal or not, whether it was in the immediate national interest of the UK or not, whether it was under an immediate security threat to the UK or our bases. When we have seen the Conservatives over 14 years hollow out our armed forces, diminish our economy, run down our reserves, to then say that as the new leader of the Conservative Party, we would commit those scarce resources to an offensive mission that is illegal and not in our interest as a country is bizarre to me.
Tom, there is a precedent for this, because in 1986, Margaret Thatcher was in deep political trouble. Bernard will remember this after the Westland affair, where Michael Heseltine resigned. She was very unpopular. And in March 1986, only about 6 weeks after that, Ronald Reagan said, right, we're going to go after Gaddafi. And we want permission for our planes to take off from RAF Lakenheath and I think RAF Mildenhall, sort of British bases, but used by the Americans. And she was under a lot of pressure from some of her cabinet, Norman Tebbit being one of them, to deny that permission. And her logic was, well, what kind of friend are we if we deny our closest ally permission to, because the French and Spanish wouldn't let those planes fly over their territory. So the planes had to take off from Britain, go all around the Iberian Peninsula to get to Libya. And that's what allies do, isn't it?
I think there's two important differences here. First of all, I was 3 when that happened.
Well, I wasn't.
And that shows just how long ago it was and how transformed the world is. Secondly, whether you're a fan of President Reagan or not, you can definitely not put him in the category of president as Donald Trump. Donald Trump has shown that he is thin-skinned and hot-headed, and the UK has to be very careful about how it manages our relationship with the United States.
I agree with that. But do you not think, though, that having spent the first 18 months of his premiership cozying up to Donald Trump for totally understandable reasons and being quite successful in building a relationship there in a way that other European leaders haven't, he's now shattered that because Trump says he's disappointed with Starmer. Well, we all know that means he's bloody furious with Starmer. And I mean, if Starmer thinks he's going to get his Chagos deal through now with Trump's support, I think he can whistle for it. I mean, it's ruined that aspect of his foreign policy, hasn't it?
I think what I would say is, looking at President Trump, he says a lot of things on his social media channels, and then he often moves away from the position that he takes. So just because he said one thing doesn't mean that the US relationship is devastated forever. And if you look at Chagos, he says certain things, and then the Pentagon and the State Department say the exact opposite. But what I would say here is that you need a prime minister. You need a prime minister who is calm in insecure times. And the Prime Minister has got a plan, whether it comes to the economy, where we've built significant headroom to improve our economic conditions in the face of threats of tariffs from Trump, whether it's around energy, where we're developing homegrown clean energy to protect against the price shocks in fossil fuel markets, as we have seen today, or whether it comes to using our defence and security resources judiciously in the interest of our country, only under immediate threat and only when legal. That, I think, is exactly the kind of Prime Minister you want.
Alex?
Sure. Well, back to the original question, should we be blindly following America? We shouldn't be blindly following anybody. Any action on this scale and basis needs to be very well thought through. Of course it does. But, Tom, you say we need a Prime Minister that is calm. We need a Prime Minister...
I said we have a Prime Minister who's calm.
No, we need a Prime Minister. We need a Prime Minister that's strong.
Well, that's not
and is decisive.
Is it? And in the boots of Donald Trump.
And we need a Prime Minister that's strong and decisive, and that's not Keir Starmer with his, 16, 17 U-turns now. And this is a major, major U-turn. Having said that the US couldn't use these bases for any purpose, now suddenly they can.
Reform U-turned and their senior leader in Wales accepting money from Russia in order to pump out Putin propaganda.
Come on, that's nothing to do.
He's in prison where he deserves to be, and everyone in Reform has said that. He was leader, 10 years, 8 years, 6 years.
That's all fine then.
And no, he's in prison, and he should be in prison, and he's staying in prison for 10 years. Can I come back to this question? We're asking about what's going on at the moment in the Middle East. And nobody should be gung-ho about the idea of going to war. And Bernard and I, we both have a strong connection with Colchester, a military town.
I think you interned in my office.
And I did once upon a time. And
you turned him into Reform.
And the last thing,
I haven't been nurturing him for a long time.
The last thing that either of us would want to be doing is sending our servicemen and women into harm's way. But when you get a situation like this, you have to look at what is on the table, what is happening. This regime in Iran is the most evil regime in the world. It is a regime that treats women absolutely disgracefully. It hangs gay people like me from cranes, and only a few weeks ago has massacred 40,000 people, its own citizens, on the streets because they want change, they want democratic opportunities.
As a gay man, I know in Iran that I would have been hung from a crane too, but I also, as a representative in our parliament, want the UK to commit resources judiciously, and you can recognise that a country is evil, that the supreme leader is better off dead, and still not commit UK resources to an offensive mission, which is illegal and not in our immediate national interest.
So you will the end, but not the means.
Can I just point something out?
In a minute, Ben, I've just got some breaking news here.
Okay.
Iran's Revolutionary Guard has claimed that it has closed the Straits of Hormuz, or the Strait of Hormuz rather, and will set any ship attempting to pass through it on fire. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the biggest trading routes for global oil supplies, so this could have some very significant effects for suppliers and prices around the world. Well, that is pretty major, isn't it, Bernard?
Well, what you're seeing is a regime that's behaving in a desperate fashion. I mean, the fact that they've lashed out against all their Arab neighbours has united the rest of the Arab world against Iran in quite an astonishing way. And it remains to be seen how effectively, or whether they are capable of closing the Straits of Hormuz. I rather doubt it, that they will be able to sustain that.
And it's all the more important that we, as a country, focus on securing our own energy supplies and making better use of the own resources we have in the North Sea, the shale gas under our feet, not just from a question of pricing, but energy security and supply. For decades, we've had a political system that has not fully exploited that. We have a government that is wedded to the net zero obsession. And we are losing out as a result, and we will continue to. If we are vulnerable to events like this happening that will have massive impact on price, but more importantly, security of supply, it's lose-lose all round. That's why we need to drill, baby, drill our own reserves.
Let me put another question to you related to this. If in theory, and I realise that for at least two of you this is going to require a stretch of imagination, but if in theory this works, that the attack on Iran works, that the regime collapses, there is some sort of peaceful transition of power to whom I do not know. But just sort of bear with me. If that happened and Iran is essentially neutered as a sort of a country that promotes terrorism all around the world, we could see a peaceful Middle East, couldn't we? I mean, I accept that it means that Trump has done this, sort of throwing the cards up in the air, where none of us are quite sure how they'll land. But if they did land in the right way, I mean, we might look back, say, in a couple of years' time and think, well, that was a masterstroke.
But there are so many ifs there.
I know there are. I absolutely know there are.
Yes, of course, if, birds flew and everyone sung and everyone held hands and said kumbaya, yes, that would be brilliant. But as a matter of fact, we look at history, if we look at what regime change has done in the past in the Middle East, that this is very complex and it never ends the way we hope it's going to. It goes on for years and years and years. People die. There's so much insurgency, fighting, conflict. It spills over into different nations. Yes, of course, it would be wonderful if we could have peace in the Middle East. But there are so many ifs there. And I think when you have someone like Donald Trump at the helm, who isn't motivated motivated by wanting to free the Iranian people. He is motivated by his own self-interest, and that self-interest changes on a dime. I do not trust him to bring peace in the Middle East.
How is it in his own self-interest to do this, given that he was promoting himself as a man of peace? I mean, this is not going to be popular in America.
A man of peace who's bombed, 7 countries so far this year? He says whatever he wants about himself, and we're supposed to believe it, but we know it isn't true. He is totally motivated by himself, his own survival. He is an episodic man. He lives in whatever's going to reward him in that moment, and that is why, to go back to Sarah's question, we should absolutely not blindly follow him.
And there's a critical point here too, which distinguishes President Reagan from President Trump, which is that with President Reagan, you knew what the strategic goal was. With President Trump, in his speech he gave earlier, is it regime change? Is it the flourishing of democracy? Is it disintegration of nuclear weaponry? Is it about trying to have a wider peace? No one's clear, and so you can't rank in order of importance what you're aiming for. So why should a UK Prime Minister, being unclear about the overall goal, commit military resources to an illegal, unnecessary offensive mission? What he has done, now that we have to act in collective self-interest and self-defence, is to commit UK resources to protecting UK interests, UK people and UK bases, and that's what you want from a Prime Minister.
You say it's illegal. The Prime Minister has not said it's illegal. I'm reminded.
Do you say it's illegal?
I don't
do you think it's
illegal at all? No.
But do you think it's a legal mission?
I think it's a legal mission.
Kemi Badenoch?
And Kemi, I think, has got an open mind and probably thinks it's a legal mission. But I'm just reminded the Prime Minister said today, no UK Prime Minister has ever committed our personnel to action unless it has
history.
Unless it has a proper lawful basis, which means he thinks the war in Iraq was legal. I don't suppose that's your view. The point here is I don't hold a candle for Donald Trump. I think the way he's destabilised the whole of the security of Western Europe is absolutely unforgivable, and his ambiguity towards NATO and his forgiveness of Putin for his atrocities and what's happening in Ukraine is absolutely extraordinary. But the question I think you're left with at the end of the day, could any regime in Iran be worse than the one we've experienced for the last 40 years?
Well, that's what they said about Saddam Hussein, wasn't it?
You don't hold a candle for Donald Trump, but Kemi Badenoch does.
I beg your pardon, sorry?
You don't hold a candle for Donald Trump. You just explain the ways in which he's a threat, but Kemi Badenoch does hold a candle to him. Today in the House of Commons, she would have been side by side, shoulder by shoulder with Donald Trump in launching this mission.
You're using very emotive language. In this particular...
So does she.
And in this particular... No, I've just read what she said. In this particular circumstance, if Kemi had been Prime Minister, we would have allowed the use of British bases for the initial attack alongside... I mean, it's a very odd position. It's okay for Israel to attack Iran because could you stop interrupting for a minute? The government's legal position is it's okay for Israel to attack Iran because Iran is a direct threat to Israel, but we're not allowed to support our allies unless they're attacked or we're attacked. That it's okay to attack Iran because they've bombed Dubai hotels, but not okay to attack Iran because they bombed American bases. I mean, this is a completely illogical position the government's got themselves in, and I think the government realised that their hands-off approach was not going to last, so they changed their position.
We've got a couple more questions on this, and then we'll move on to other subjects. You can phone in on other subjects too on 0345 6060 973. It's 19 minutes past 8.
Conflict in the Middle East. Follow live on LBC.
You've probably
Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
8:20 on LBC. It's a slightly spiky cross question tonight, mainly due to Tom Hayes, Labour MP for Bournemouth East, and Sir Bernard Jenkins, Conservative MP for Harwich and North Essex. Zoe Grunewald is here. She is Westminster editor of the website The Lead, and Alex Wilson, Reform UK member of the London Assembly. Right, we have a caller, Jay in Portsmouth. Jay, what would you like to ask?
Hi, and thanks for taking my question, and good evening to all. So my question is, now that international law is no longer sacrosanct, how might this embolden others, including China and Russia, but specifically bringing it back to the Middle East? How might it embolden Israel to be in breach of even more UN resolutions? They're already in breach of more than 30. How might this embolden them even further in the West Bank, where they're already terrorising civilians? And how do those civilians defend themselves other than resorting to terrorism?
Goodness me, you packed in a lot there. Zoe?
I didn't quite get the grasp of the question. Sorry.
Do you want to condense it, Jay?
How might... OK, so international law is clearly no longer sacrosanct, given the actions of the last 24 hours or so. How might that embolden China and Russia? But bringing it back to the Middle East, how might it embolden Israel to breach even more UN resolutions?
Right. That's the crux of it.
Yes, I understand. Well, I would say Israel's already clearly been emboldened and has been for some time, committing atrocities in Gaza. Russia, of course, has already been emboldened with its illegal incursion into Ukraine. China has been shoring up its military presence and acting aggressively, as we know. We were already on a precipice, and I think a lot of people were... through the last kind of decade or so, even further, we have been relying on the US to act as the kind of world policeman to keep things steady. And now with Donald Trump, we have realised that that has fallen away. And not only has it fallen away in the kind of MAGA, actually, this is going to be an isolationist president. Turns out that isn't what MAGA meant. It turned out that when Donald Trump was talking about America first, he meant whatever he deems to belong to America whenever he thinks that's what he wants. So what we have is somebody in the White House who absolutely subscribes to the strongman thesis, but is also incredibly unreliable and unpredictable. And of course, if you are another strongman in this world, you will look at the world order and think now is the perfect time to take what I want, because there isn't going to be this presence pushing back against me. And we have I think we in the UK and in Europe, we have to hold our hands up and say we have sat on our hands a bit here. We should have been shoring up our defences. We should have been thinking about our alliances. We should have been thinking how vulnerable we were, expecting the US to protect us. And now we can clearly see that has backfired. So we need to think about how we secure ourselves. I think that is definitely moving closer to Europe in terms of security, in terms of our alliances, in terms of our values, trying to distance ourselves from the US. But we need to think realistically about this. Donald Trump, you know, the first month of this year, the incursion into Venezuela, and now we have Iran. I mean, this is spiralling out of control.
Do you never consider what the people of Iran and Venezuela think? Because universally, I mean, certainly expats from Iran and Venezuela, they won't hear a word against Donald Trump.
Well, I mean, and you can completely understand why the Iranians, for example, would be celebrating the death of the Ayatollah. I mean, that brutal, repressive regime. I mean, it was when there were the protests not that long ago, the stories coming out of, the army going into hospitals and killing civilians. I mean, it is extraordinarily dreadful. So no one is mourning him and no one is denying how brutal and oppressive that regime is.
But there are people on the left that are.
Well, I am not. And we have international law.
I wasn't suggesting that you were, but you will know that there are feminist groups who seem to think that Iran is a beacon for feminism.
Well, that isn't my view. And I would say that the thing I really care about, and I think is the crux of Jay's question, is international law. If we do not have international law and order, if we do not have standards and values we hold ourselves to, things can very quickly descend into anarchy.
Alex Wilson?
Yeah, I mean, we do have standards and values, and those standards and values should include Western allies holding firm together and working together. And that means Europe and America and Australia and Canada, all our countries in the Western Alliance. Allies can disagree in private, but have to stand together in public, and that's what we've not seen on this. We've seen this breakdown, this weakness, absolute weakness from Starmer. But the question asked, has Israel been emboldened? Israel hasn't been emboldened by anything. Israel is responding and since October the 7th has been responding to an existential threat where Iran is the biggest state sponsor and exporter of terror, sponsoring the Houthis, sponsoring Hamas, sponsoring Hezbollah, and engineering that assault on Israel, which is an existential threat. They're responding to that.
But it was in no way proportionate, was it? I mean, cutting off food, water, not letting journalists in.
We're not going to get into that.
But I mean, but it's worth saying, isn't it? Because
the question was about...
And it isn't in terms of international law.
The question is predominantly about Russia and China.
Yeah. And the way to keep Russia and China in check is for the West to hold together as an alliance, and that's something that the actions of Starmer and not allowing the use of bases. That's what's emboldening China and Russia by the West not holding together. That's what we need to do.
Tom, do you think that this will embolden President Xi? I mean, it now might be an ideal time, just as in 1956 when the Suez crisis was going on, the Soviets marched into Hungary. You can imagine people in the Chinese regime thinking, well, maybe now's the time to seize Taiwan.
If I may, I will answer that question, but we were just hearing there from your reform spokesperson about the importance of Western allies, Alex, hanging together. So it takes two to tango. If Donald Trump doesn't want to tango, it's hard to actually keep that dance going. So if Donald Trump were to invade Greenland, which ally would you stand with?
That's a completely ridiculous question. He's not going to invade Greenland. It's just
quite right. It's absolutely nonsense. He's never threatened military action against Greenland.
Okay, Tom,
get back in your box.
I've just been told to get my box by Bernard Jenkins. That's a win in my career. I grew up watching Bernard on Prime Minister's Questions, asking questions of the Prime Minister, so I'm going to chalk that up as a win. The question about whether this emboldens China, I think it does. I think there's two important points to make here. The first is around international law, and the second is about the power of countries. So we now know that international law really only has integrity if the US is fully committed to it. We thought for the longest time that the US would hold to and safeguard the alliance that it had built because it was in its self-interest to do so. Clearly, the president does not believe that anymore. As to whether the wider American security establishment does is another question. We need to know whether the US military relationship that we have, the US diplomatic relationship that we have, can survive Trump. So that then makes you wonder what you have to do next. Zoe was right. We have to rebuild our defence and security resources. The fact that they were hollowed out for so long by the Conservatives is a terrible situation. If I may just go back to then the question about international law, what you've seen from the Prime Minister today is him saying very clearly, we believe in international law, we are sticking by it. That's why we did not commit to the offensive military action when asked to by our closest ally. But when we had to act in collective self-defence, we did. So you have a Prime Minister who upholds international law. With Kemi Badenoch, you have a leader of the Conservative Party who, as Prime Minister, would, I think, have committed the UK to a very close military relationship with the US, which involves a projection of force into this region, in spite of its consequences for international law. That is a far, far distance from where the Conservative Party that I knew and grew up with stood.
Bernard.
Well, which is more important, a rather strict and precious interpretation of international law, or the rights of citizens in Iran who have been so viciously persecuted and slaughtered by this regime, and which is also threatening to annihilate a neighbouring state? I just think that, the problem with international law is there is no international that enforces the law. The UN Security Council is permanently deadlocked. The only law that can be enforced is law enforced by sovereign states. And therefore, the whole of international law is a somewhat political construct. It's a very useful framework of rules for states to work and cooperate together where they agree.
But if major countries...
in terms of emboldening Russia, for example, Russia walked into the Crimea in 2014. They walked into Georgia in 2008. And the idea that Russia needed emboldening to do anything after what they've done in Ukraine.
If a country like
China and Russia are countries that have absolutely no respect for the international rules-based system, and this government has the habit of tying its hands behind its back. Yes, but they're encouraged to
behave like that if democratic countries start behaving like that.
Well, I think they're encouraged to behave like that because they respect only hard power. And if they're greeted with people waving placards about international law and bleating that they can't do anything, they regard that as weakness and they will take advantage.
Mark
and that's
Carney,
what they've done.
In his speech at the Munich Security Conference, he was very critical of international law, wasn't he? He said it's almost become irrelevant.
He backed this action.
Yeah.
So, firstly, I think it's interesting that Sir Bernard there was saying that you can discard international law to protect civilians in a country from being repressed and murdered.
That was called the right to protect, and I remember Tony Blair
just
going
to
on a
finish
lot
the
about
point that I was making here is this shows the confusion around what the end goal of the military action is. Is it to diminish the nuclear weaponry, the means of delivery, to allow a democratic revolution, to protect people? So what are the other circumstances within which Sir Bernard could see international law being discarded? We have to get clarity. Oh, sorry, I tapped the table there. We have to get clarity.
Getting carried away.
And I am getting carried away because I think it's such, I grew up with the Berlin Wall coming down, with a flourishing of peace across Eastern Europe, with a progressive Labour government, and with us growing closer to the European Union. And ever since, we've seen a roller coaster of chaos, and we need to get back to a place where the UK is the leader in the world.
Why do you think the Berlin Wall came down? Because you had leaders in NATO, predominantly Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, but not just them, who stood up to the Soviet Union and said, up with this, we will not put. Now, they did that within the international rules-based system, but we're 40 years on from that now, aren't we? So maybe we have to recognise
the Soviet Union was constantly in violation.
Well,
whatever we did, they were in constant violation.
We're going to move on to some other subjects in the next half an hour here on Cross Question. It's 8:31. Let's get the LBC News headlines from Daryl Jackson.
Donald Trump has called the military campaign against Iran necessary to defuse the colossal threat to America. Speaking at the White House, the president said operations are likely to last 4 to 5 weeks, but he's prepared to go on longer if necessary. Earlier, he'd criticised Sir Keir Starmer for taking too long to change his mind and allow America to strike Iran from a joint airbase in the Chagos Islands. The Prime Minister defended his decision and doubled down on his choice not to join the US-Israeli offensive, but continue acting defensively. The conflict in the region is escalating, with Israel exchanging strikes with Iranian-backed Hezbollah militants in Lebanon. And Iran's Revolutionary Guards say the country has closed the Strait of Hormuz, adding that the military will set any ship trying to pass on fire. The strait is the world's most vital oil export route and is controlled by Iran. LBC weather: rain slowly pushing east this evening, gradually weakening. Clear spells at first in the east, cold and frosty in the north, lows between -2 and 8 degrees.
This is LBC. Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:34 on LBC. We have with us Labour MP for Bournemouth East, Tom Hayes, Sir Bernard Jenkins, Conservative MP for Harwich and North Essex, Zoe Grunewald, political journalist from The Lead website, and Alex Wilson, Reform UK member of the London Assembly. Now, the next is a text question from Alex in Barnet. When it comes to all the Brits who've gone to live in Dubai to dodge tax, does the government really owe them anything? Well, I mean, does everyone who goes to Dubai do it for tax dodging reasons? I'm not sure that's true. But anyway, now the Lib Dem leader, Sir Ed Davey, has called on people he described as tax exiles who've gone to live in the Middle East to start paying taxes to fund our armed forces, just like the rest of us do. Alex.
Well, the tone of the question is clearly quite petty and flippant, but it actually cuts to a different question, which is something that we all need to be very, very cognizant of: the fact that high-value net worth individuals are leaving this country at an unprecedented rate, more fleeing London than any other capital city apart from Moscow, and the reason being Rachel Reeves' catastrophic mismanagement of the economy. It's impossible, well, maybe not impossible, but very, very difficult to set up a business, run a business, employ people, generate economic activity in this country. That's why people are fleeing the country.
So they should stay in Dubai then?
Well, no, they should, ideally they could be in an environment where they could do that in this country, and people if the people who are paying or who would be paying the most tax are leaving the country, then the burden falls on the rest of us, and that's why we're seeing a stagnant economy. We're seeing an absolute disaster. Unemployment up every month since Rachel Reeves' first budget. Well, it's very related to the question. People are leaving the country because the tax regime, the regulation regime, it's oppressive.
Let's actually read the question out again so you can actually provide an answer to it. When it comes to all the Brits who've gone to live in Dubai to dodge tax, does the government really owe them anything?
We owe them two things. Can I answer that?
Well, I'd quite like an answer from Alex first.
Bernard, you come in. Go on.
Well, the first thing we owe them is what protection we can possibly give them under this very dire situation and I don't imagine the government's going to be able to bring forward a plan to evacuate 350,000 expats from the Gulf states. But we owe them the best protection we can. The other thing we owe them in the long term, which is picking up Alex's point, we do owe them a lower tax economy, a higher growth economy that they will want to return to and prosper in. At the moment, the government's not succeeding in that, which is why people are leaving.
Your answer indicated that you think that Dubai is a better place to live than Britain.
It's not somewhere I would not want to live because I like a drink too much, but it's clearly a place where people want to go.
And you're gay.
Well, that too, yeah. So I'm not going there. I'm staying here in London, where I'm committed to representing the people that voted for me.
Tom?
Gosh, there's a lot in that, wasn't there? I think the first thing I've got to say is that it is incorrect of both of you to be criticising and running down our economy. We've seen inflation fall sharply to 3%. In December, the government was borrowing £12 billion pounds less.
And we've seen unemployment at the highest rate since the pandemic.
And we're also seeing government borrowing drop to the lowest level since the pandemic. 6 interest rates cut with a possible 7th on the way. And that's because we've got a Chancellor and a Prime Minister who have got a plan for our economy.
Just as I pulled up Alex for not
you can actually withstand the resilience in our international...
Answer the question,
in our insecure world, which then links to Dubai.
For goodness sake! Tom, please answer the question.
I think that if somebody is living in Dubai, that's a regrettable state of life. And I think that you should be living in the UK, where it's a far better place, and you'll be having improving public services for what you contribute as part of the social contract. I think also that if you are a British citizen, you are entitled to the support of your state. If you've got a British passport, you're entitled to the British state stepping in and protecting you as and when needed. And I know the government are working really hard to come up with contingency plans in response to the US-Israeli offensive that we chose not to join, because in part we knew that it was going to lead to Iranian retaliation and greater insecurity and instability for our people.
And Alex, that's a valid point, isn't it? If you're a British citizen and you have a British passport, to quote the question, the government really does owe you some degree of protection.
Absolutely, and that's what we should be doing.
Okay. You didn't say that.
Sorry?
Well, this is why we pay tax, because people want services from their government. They want their government to help them out when they're in a tough spot. That's why we pay tax. That's why we have a welfare state. That's why we have public services. Well, precisely. So if those people want to be rescued, and I actually think we should. I think we have a duty to British citizens if they're in danger. I do. But I would hope that they come back and they realise that this is why we have to pay tax in this country. And especially in a time where there is more global conflict, people expect more from the state. With technology, we expect the state to be faster, quicker, more efficient. We're all going to have to pay more tax. So I would say bring them back and then have a sharp word with them about paying their tax bill, because I don't think it's right that people go to Dubai to dodge tax. I don't think it's right that we have people from Reform and the Conservatives talking down Britain. If we want a state that functions properly, if we want public services, if we want a government that is able to rescue British citizens, then we all need to pay for it.
Right, let's move on to this question from Steve. Based on the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, and unlike the view of your Reform guest Alex, does this not show that a move to renewable power and sustainable local farming are simply a necessity? Tom?
I would completely agree with the need to have food security, and also that we've got a energy infrastructure which can sustain massive shocks in the international system. We saw inflation peak at 11% because of President Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine. I'd be interested to see if Reform would agree that it was an illegal invasion of Ukraine. And so by building nuclear and renewables at the pace that we are, Great British Energy being supported by £8.6 billion of startup capital, and emerging technologies being supported, we're not just getting the homegrown energy that gives us greater security and protects us against volatility, we're also giving young people in my constituency of Bournemouth East the skills, the training, the opportunities to get on in life, to earn a decent wage, to live close to their families, afford a home. That means they don't have to move further away, that they can be part of their family life. And as a consequence, they can have a higher quality of life because we've got key growth sectors being powered. That is something that we've been missing out on as a country and a town for a very, very long time. And I'm thrilled that we have a government which recognises the need to have energy independence and security, reduce the cost of living. We've got energy bills coming down by £117 from April. Really? And that we also have greater economic opportunity because of these investments.
That is a bit of sophistry, isn't it? Because they're actually going up more than that.
£117 is the amount that the bills are coming down.
It says in the brief.
You'll see that. Unlike you, I don't have anything in front of me.
Bernard, go on.
Well, the answer is we need a mix of energy sources. And what is crazy is closing down the North Sea and becoming entirely reliant on intermittent renewables. I'm all in favour of net zero, but if we try and rush this, we're going to finish up more vulnerable than we were before, and we'll be having to import electricity from countries in Europe where we're building new interconnectors and importing more gas, which makes us more vulnerable than less vulnerable. And the only reason that gas-fired electricity is so expensive is because it's all on short-term demand to fill the gaps in the renewables. If we had baseload gas supply from the North Sea powering permanently on combined cycle gas turbine power stations, we'd have much cheaper energy because the gas is a quarter of the price of the electricity produced from the gas that we're getting at the moment, the gas-powered electricity that we're getting at the moment. It's all rather complicated, this. But we are cutting off our nose to spite our face when the rest of the world is pumping more and more oil and gas as the prices go up, and we're closing down the North Sea. That is not in our economic or energy security interest.
Tom, you were shaking your head doing virtually all of that answer.
There's so many points to pick up there.
There may be, but...
So what's the most immediate you want me to pick up? I just think that you have to, as a country, recognise that the world is becoming so much more unstable, that when your closest traditional ally is led by somebody who is less predictable, you have to invest in your energy security and your energy independence.
That's what I'm saying.
And you need to recognise too that the way to do that is to maximise economic opportunities, the skilling up of younger people, and the creation of jobs that are well paid locally. And you would only get that from nuclear and from renewables. I've had the privilege of going to Hinkley Point C and seeing what they're building there. It's remarkable. It's absolutely fantastic. If you want to see the future, go to Hinkley Point C. And we need to have many more nuclear sites being developed. We need to have many more wind farms. We need to have geothermal, solar rolled out en masse. And really, that's how you get to energy security.
Okay, sorry?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Tom. I think we need a managed transition. We need to try and bring the public along with us. We need to think about how we sell it to the public. We need to be honest about the costs of building these things in the meantime. But quite clearly, every time there is a global shock, when one of these strongman countries decides to do something that rattles everything we know across the world, we always feel it in the price at the pump. And I think we need to think about how we can make our energy supply more consistent, more secure long term. And that means investing in renewables. We know that wind is getting cheaper now.
To the exclusion of fossil fuels.
We need to phase it out. I mean, we do, because we're too reliant on it. It's not good for the environment. We've got our net zero obligations. It makes us reliable on other powers who are far too unreliable.
But if we have oil and gas ourselves, I mean, isn't Bernard right? Why wouldn't we exploit that?
Well, because we have net zero obligations we have to meet. We have renewables we have to invest in. We have promises to the next generation, and we have marginal gas pricing, which means that we are tethered to all these international shocks that happen. So no, I don't think that is the answer. I think a managed transition is what we need to do.
Wind power is also becoming much more expensive.
It's becoming cheaper.
The latest round was the highest strike price they've ever had in any round.
But as we know, these technologies get
that's
cheaper
more expensive.
over
it's
time.
Not cheaper. Well, how does it get cheaper over time when you've locked in the price?
Okay, let's bring in Alex.
Yeah, the one thing that Tom said that is right is we do need to invest more in nuclear. one thing.
At least two or three. Come on.
Yes, we agree on that.
Come on, one
Tom
at a
gets
time.
a point for that.
One at a time.
We've heard talk of things like small modular reactors being talked about for a decade or so, and it's just simply isn't happening. And we absolutely need, during that period of transition, because nuclear will take a while to come on stream, we do need to be making better use of our own natural resources, which is oil and gas. Only yesterday, I think a collection of 8 former energy ministers have called on the government to rethink this dash for net zero, and calling for rethink on the windfall taxes and the ban on new exploration licences, because you are being totally disingenuous, and this government is being totally disingenuous under your government.
Energy ministers who set the climate, the net zero ambition.
You've had to go. Let him have a go.
Come on,
sorry.
Thanks for taking over the chair, Bernard.
Energy bills have gone up £190 under this government. Even with this reduction in April, it will still be £73 higher than when you came into office. So for you to be saying you're reducing bills is simply not true. You went to the country on a manifesto of reducing bills by £300. That isn't happening, and it won't happen for as long as we're wedded to these unreliable, intermittent and expensive net zero technologies. We need to drill, baby, drill, make use of the resources we have. That way we can power our economy and power our homes. And it's win-win in all rounds.
Jay says, this is a great cross question. More shouting over one another, please. Not sure that's reflective of the whole audience, but there we go. No, you're very calm, Bernard. You're just very good at interrupting. It's 8:46.
LBC.
Attempts
Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:48. 2 MPs on the panel, Tom Hayes for Labour and Sir Bernard Jenkins for the Conservatives, journalist Zoe Grunewald and Alex Wilson, Reform UK member of the London Assembly. Martin is in Doncaster. Hi, Martin.
Hello, Iain and panel. My question is with the loss for Labour at the by-election and the Tories only just beating Sir Hoyinkalot, will it be a bloodbath for both parties at the local elections?
Zoe.
I think, was it Kemi got 552 more votes than Sir Hoyinkalot? I think something like that.
Oh, don't underplay it. 1.9% of the vote.
Okay, sorry. Excuse me.
0.1% more than the Lib Dems.
Yes. Oh, okay. Well, it's worth shouting about, definitely. Will it be a bloodbath? Well, yes. I think it's going to be a very difficult set of local elections for both Labour and the Conservatives. I mean, people are feeling very fed up with the incumbent government, and that is a trend we're seeing actually across the world. People are feeling fed up with the cost of living, the result of all these conflicts we're seeing, squeezing people's pay packets, squeezing their energy supply. So yes, people are fed up and they're turning away from the two main parties. I think what's going to be really interesting about the locals is seeing whether the Greens can actually make more gains in these seats that they weren't really their target seats. So Gorton and Denton, yes, they had their eye on it, but it certainly wasn't one of their top seats.
I think it's 127th on their list.
Absolutely. They were looking more at the kind of, the sort of inner city progressive areas, places like Bristol, Hackney. And so we've heard a lot from Reform, and I think the media give Reform a lot of attention. And we hear about how fed up people are, how they're turning away from the centre. People were assuming they're turning towards Reform, but actually I think what we've seen now in both Caerphilly and in Gorton and Denton is that actually people do want progressive answers to some of the questions they're asking, whether that's a victory for the Greens, whether that's a victory for Plaid Cymru. Clearly, people are not happy with what the government's delivering, but the answer isn't reform, it's people wanting better public services, answers to the cost of living, dignity in work. And that's exactly what the Green Party said they were going to deliver in Gorton and Denton. And I think that's why it was so tough for Labour, because that had been their ground historically.
Alex?
Yeah, well, as you know, Ian, by-elections can be very interesting and very significant. In my bag outside, I've got a copy of your book, which my mum, who's listening, gave it to me for my birthday a couple of weeks ago.
She's a fine woman, your mum.
I was hoping on the way out you might be able to sign it. We'll see. But in that book, 88 really significant by-elections. If you'd been publishing it a year later, certainly you would have put the Gorton and Denton one at the very end of it. Really, really interesting by-election, very, very significant on its own merits. But what you also have to look at is how that fits in with the wider kind of trend in politics, in voting intention polls and in council by-elections, which happen every week up and down the country. And if you look at what's been happening in those contests, which a parliamentary by-election, you can't pick and choose where it happens. It happens where it is. We thought it was worth having a crack at it. We got 29%, which was in line with our national voting intention polling and also in line with the constituency polling that was done in that election. So we're very pleased with that result in a constituency where 3/4 of the population voted for left parties at the last general election. But the point is, in those, if you look at where contests are happening in every region across the country, then since the local elections last year, Reform have made a net gain of 63 seats in those council by-elections. The Greens have made a net gain of just 2. So our growth, which is very, very real, is also very, very national, which bodes extremely well for what will happen on May the 7th.
If you look at the Caerphilly by-election, which was obviously for the Senate, not the UK Parliament, you were tipped to win that, just as you were tipped to win Gorton and Denton. And you lost out to the main, left-wing party, the anti-Labour left-wing party, Plaid in Caerphilly, and obviously the Greens in Gorton and Denton. Do you think there is a danger that you can't really poll over 30% in these? I don't know what they're doing in the local elections, but they're probably slightly irrelevant to this question, that if you're going to win a parliamentary majority or even form a minority government, you're going to have to win over 30% of the vote in many seats.
Yeah, and in Caerphilly, the Plaid were helped by having a very strong local candidate who I think had stood in that constituency either for Westminster or for the Senate in something like 12 consecutive elections. So they had a strong advantage there. But the day after the result came through last week, then Britain Elects, who do lots of very clever stuff with number crunching, their modelling showed that on basis of proportional swing in that by-election, if that was replicated across the country, now this is just a bit of fun, they said, but if that was replicated across the country, that would deliver 415 Reform MPs. So we're very pleased with that result. It wasn't our top target seat.
Tom,
we did very well.
It probably will be a difficult night for Labour and for the Conservatives, answering your question directly. And for Labour, that will be because we will be 20 or so months into being a government. I went canvassing this morning in my constituency in Southbourne and Littledown and was talking with people, and they pretty much summed up where we are, which is that we don't want to throw stones backwards. We know where we come from. We just want to know where we go to. And looking at the legislation that's about to come into effect, whether it's the Renters' Rights Act, the Employment Rights Act, whether it's the rolling out of 3,000 neighbourhood police officers across the country, the free breakfast clubs, the 500,000 kids being lifted out of poverty. I'm not going to do a shopping list, don't worry.
Well, you just did.
But my point, no, because I could go on for longer. But my point here is that people will feel this change. They will.
But not by May.
But maybe not by May. And I can promise you that in my constituency, people who never voted Labour before the general election are starting to see the first glimmer of that change. And when people feel that change more deeply, not yet maybe, But when people start to feel that more deeply, I think they will feel more confident. And when you do have a Prime Minister who is calmly projecting leadership in a time of deep international insecurity, I think people remember what came before.
Bernard?
Well, it was a terrible result for Labour and the Conservatives. The disillusion with the two main parties, and even in this case the Liberal Democrats, is absolutely palpable. There's a really serious question we should be asking ourselves as politicians, is why has the electorate lost so much faith in the main parties and indeed in our whole system of government? And it's the flight to the extreme parties which should cause us great concern. And I expect this is going to be seen again in the local elections, as Tom rightly says. But these are, in the end, this is the politics of protest in mid-term, not the politics of choice. It's far too soon to say what the landscape is going to be like in 27, 28, 29 as we approach a proper general election. People will be much more fearful about the consequences of what they're voting for and much more careful in the use of their vote. And just as a reminder, the turnout in the by-election was less than 50%, as turnouts generally are.
But it was in the general election too. That's, I think, the worrying point for both of the parties.
And there's another point to make, which is the Greens here were rabidly pro-Gaza, anti-Israel. And they were definitely appealing to a sectarian vote in the constituency in a ruthless way, which cost Labour, because Labour has had a much more responsible policy towards Gaza and Israel than the Greens. And I think that cost them a great deal in the election. But I mean, what we're seeing here is almost the racialisation of British politics in some constituencies, and that is itself a very dangerous thing.
Okay, let's move on to another question. It's from Nicole in Sutton Coldfield, or if Andrew Mitchell was here, Royal Sutton Coldfield. Why does the government think it's going to benefit them to be less welcoming to people in the most desperate need? Now, asylum seekers will now have their refugee status reviewed every 18 months rather than every 5 years, as is currently the case, while LBC's political editor, Natasha Clark, has also exclusively revealed that asylum seekers could now be paid up to £30,000 to leave the country. Zoe?
Well, apart from the
short answer.
Okay, I'll be quick. Apart from the cruelty of this policy, it's unworkable. Okay, how are you going to get an already overstretched Home Office to review asylum seekers' cases every 30 months? How are you going to do anything to solve the backlog? How are you going to get people to integrate into their communities, to feel like members of those communities, think about how they can contribute to them, which is exactly the whole purpose of this, according to the government. So it's unworkable, it's immoral, it's cruel. I think it shows how far the conversation around asylum seekers and people in need has sunk in this country, and I find it very disappointing and fundamentally un-Labour.
Tom Hayes, the Monday Club in the 1980s, sort of very right-wing group within the Conservative Party, used to say we should pay immigrants to go back to where they came from. I mean, this is akin to that, isn't it?
So before I was elected, I used to run UK campaigns for an international development charity, which included calling for safe and legal routes. I also think that we need to be managing our borders much better than we did under the Conservatives. In my constituency, people have a level of anxiety about the situation.
I don't know whose phone keeps going off, but can you please shut it off?
It's almost like it's a Russian attempt to stop me speaking. So I was looking at reform. But I think
you should get some updated attack lines. That's really old news. Come on.
Sorry, I can't hear you. We need to be thinking about how we can take away some of the insecurity within our constituencies. And people do feel concerned about the inability to get control of borders historically. By reducing the use of asylum hotels leading to their closure by 2029, in Bournemouth we've got 100 fewer
on this specific proposal, because we really haven't got much time.
The specific proposal,
pay people to go back to somewhere.
I think the whole raft of proposals which have come forward from the government today are going to help to reduce the numbers of people coming across in small boats, reduce the numbers in our country waiting for a decision, and help ultimately to get our borders under greater control, while also making sure those who have got genuine right to remain in our country because they're fleeing persecution, war, rape, sexual violence, the very worst things somebody can know, that they've got a sanctuary.
Okay, Bernard.
Well, the government are struggling to be seen to be doing something, having failed to smash the gangs, having seen now record numbers coming across the English Channel so far this year. And last year was a record year. we're in a terrible situation, and I'm fearful that paying people to leave who shouldn't have come here in the first place is actually going to increase the sort of honeypot effect of the United Kingdom. People will come here in order to be paid to leave, and it'll become a racket. I will wait and see. I think Zoe's probably right. That the Home Office probably hasn't got the capacity to do this anyway, because the whole system of making decisions about asylum cases has become far more judicial than it used to be. It used to be an administrative decision, and it's now being made into a judicial decision, which makes it far, far too difficult. We need to reform the law around this.
Alex?
Yeah, this is an act of desperation from a government that's completely lost the plot, lost its way, and lost any sense of being able to deliver on what is a huge topic that matters to lots and lots of people whose doors I knock on week. They came to power talking about smashing the gangs. All that Keir Starmer's managed to do is smash the records, have more illegal boat crossings under his premiership than under any other previous Prime Minister. And even if the Home Secretary was serious about this, I honestly can't believe that Tom's colleagues will go with it. So it's not going to happen. The only way to get on top of this problem is a change of government, a reform government.
In a word, embarrassing.
Yeah, your record in government is absolutely catastrophic.
Our fun question comes from Martha in Falmer. The Brit Awards took place over the weekend. Who is your favourite British performer of all time? Zoe?
I'm just going to say, because Olivia Dean won all those awards and she is fantastic, and I think she really is a new talent, and I love seeing female pop stars get the recognition they deserve for the skill of the craft. So Olivia Dean, go on.
Alex?
Well, there's so many to choose from. I absolutely love live music. It's one of the best ways of spending a night out, going and watch so I love watching all sorts of bands. Probably, as we've been talking about Manchester earlier on, then for the purpose of this question, I'll say Oasis.
Goodness me. Tom?
We've got agreement. So I was raised on the Beatles by my dad, and I've got a huge soft spot for them, but I'm originally from Greater Manchester, so Oasis, and I grew up as a 90s kid. So don't look back in anger.
Well, I'm really a classical music person, and I hate being asked to choose my favourite composer because it's impossible to have one. But if it was a pop group, it would be Queen, because I think they were the most extraordinary pinnacle of rock.
Well, shame on the lot of you for not saying Cliff Richard. Thank you very much indeed. Very spicy cross question tonight. Tomorrow's panel, after Rachel Reeves delivers her spring statement, which apparently is only going to last 15 minutes. That can't be true. I'll be joined by the chair of the Treasury Committee of MPs, Labour's Dame Meg Hillier, Reform UK campaigner and former Conservative Chancellor Nadeem Zahawi, Conservative Shadow Treasury Minister James Wilde, and the TUC Chief Paul Novak. But coming up in the next hour, we're going to return to the subject of Iran. And I think a lot of people have a lot of questions that they want to know about what's going on in this conflict, in this war, whatever you want to call it. So we're going to have two guests in the studio that are going to take your calls. So if there's been something that's been troubling you over the last 3 days and thinking, well, I'm a bit embarrassed to ask this, but I want to know more, now's your chance. 0345 6060 973. Nazanin Ansari will be joining us, an Iranian journalist who's the managing editor of the Persian language news website Kayhan London and its English version Kayhan Life. And Air Marshal Edward Stringer will be joining us as well, former Director General of Joint Force Development at the UK Strategic Command.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, Sir Keir Starmer's defended not joining the US and Israel in bombing Iran.
We all remember the mistakes of Iraq, and we have learned those lessons. Any UK actions must always have a lawful basis and a viable, thought-through plan.
Speaking in the Commons, the Prime Minister said the UK would continue defensive actions but wouldn't join the offensive. Donald Trump's declared operations against Iran are likely to last 4 to 5 weeks, but is prepared to go far longer than that. The US President says the military campaign is substantially ahead of time projections. He responded to claims he wants it to end quickly.
Somebody actually said, I think you'll get bored after about a week or two. No, we don't get bored. I never get bored. If I got bored, I wouldn't be standing here right now, I guarantee you that. We also projected 4 weeks to terminate the military leadership, and as you know, that was done in about an hour.
US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has been speaking to the media in the last hour and says there are no plans to put troops on the ground. He also says the hardest hits on Iran are yet to come.
The next phase will be even more punishing on Iran than it is right now. Someone was screaming, how long will it take? I don't know how long it'll take. We have objectives. We will do this as long as it takes to achieve those objectives, and we will achieve those objectives. The world will be a safer place when we're done.
Well, the Prime Minister's said the government's sending rapid deployment teams to the region to support British nationals on the ground. He told the Commons earlier he wants to ensure they can return as quickly and safely as possible. It's understood limited commercial flights from Dubai will be restarting this evening, and a few flights have left from Abu Dhabi. Iran's issued a warning after announcing the strategically important Strait of Hormuz has been closed. It says any ship trying to pass through the narrow waterway will be set alight. And 4 US military personnel are known to have died since the bombing began on Saturday. The Iranian Red Crescent says more than 550 people in Iran have lost their lives. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 130 points at 10,780. The pound buys $1.34 and €1.14. LBC weather, rain slowly pushing east this evening, gradually weakening. Cold and frosty in the north, lows of between -2 and 8 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
I've looked after my kids since they were born. Now they've got kids. I still want to look after them. I don't want them struggling to make decisions about my money or my health if I can't. So we made a lasting power of attorney. Now, if I can't speak for myself, they'll speak for me. It's a weight off for all of us, isn't it?
Yes, Mum. Lasting power of attorney. Search your voice, your decision.
I've looked after my kids since they were born. Now they've got kids. I still want to look after them. I don't want them struggling to make decisions about my money or my health if I can't. So we made a lasting power of attorney. Now, if I can't speak for myself, they'll speak for me. It's a weight off for all of us, isn't it?
Yes, Mum. Lasting power of attorney. Search your voice, your decision.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's Iain Dale with you until 10. It's 7 minutes past 9. And we spent the bulk of the programme tonight talking about what's happening in Iran, as you might expect. And we're going to spend the next hour talking about it too. And it's really down to you in many ways to make this a success, because I've got 2 guests with me in the studio. They're both experts in their own fields. And if you've got any question on what's happening in Iran, whether it's about the views maybe of the Iranian people, which I know you can't particularly generalised, but we have Nazanin Ansari with us, Iranian journalist who's the managing editor of the Persian language news website Kayhan London and its English version Kayhan Life. Nazanin, welcome to the studio. And also Air Marshal Edward Stringer, he's got the longest job title in history, I think, here. Former Director General of Joint Force Development at the UK Strategic Command, the body which links the UK Armed Forces together, and also previously the Assistant Chief of Air Staff in the Royal Air Force. So if you've got any questions on the military aspect of what's going on in the Middle East at the moment, or maybe the future of Iran, maybe what's been going on over the last 47 years since the revolution, Nazanin is here to answer those questions. And I can hopefully answer questions if you've got them on the state of British politics vis-à-vis this conflict. Now, both in the last few minutes, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has spoken to reporters, and he said that the US had to attack Iran because we knew, his words not mine, that Israel was about to launch an attack on Tehran. Mr. Rubio has said that if the US had not launched strikes, then Iran would have attacked the US in response to that Israeli action. Edward, that sounds slightly contorted logic, doesn't it?
I think it's an extension of what the Secretary of War, Hegseth, and indeed Trump have said, which is essentially to make a much broader case about the threat that is posed by Iran, the arsenal it's building, and a sense of at some point it's going to have to be confronted. That does sound a little tortured in trying to make a very specific case, you'd have to get the international lawyers in, and I'm sure they'd earn a lot of money arguing about the pros and cons of that. But I think
we all know that if Donald Trump says to Netanyahu, you will not do this, because if you do, we will cut off all support to you, that Israel wouldn't do it. What Rubio has said makes America look rather weak, I would have thought.
There were some hints beforehand that the US administration was looking for the Israelis to lead on it. So maybe he's just saying the quiet bit out loud. But I think you're quite right, as we've seen before, when Trump has demanded things, Netanyahu has done them. You remember the apology to Qatar.
Yeah. Nazanin, Rubio has also said that regime change is not an objective, but, quotes, we'd love to see a change. Again, slightly contorted.
At the end of the day, basically the United States, the international community is facing a regime that has been bent on extending its powers beyond its borders since its inception, and its main targets have been the United States, Israel, and all interests that were against the Islamic Republic. So I wish the Islamic Republic had been overthrown much sooner. As soon as it was succeeded, the revolution succeeded, because it wouldn't have been so strong as it is now. But at the end of the day, it was coming, and now there were negotiations with the United States, with Mr. Trump, and they weren't going to give in. There were 3 demands, at the very least: the nuclear, the ballistic missiles, and their proxies in the Middle East. And they were just going to try, their strategy was to prolong these negotiations so that it would get to November, the second term of President Trump. And there you go.
I've been seeing on my Instagram reels over the last 3 days loads of people who've got videos of their reaction when they heard that Ayatollah Khamenei had been killed. And these were not, you just know they weren't staged. They were actually genuine films. Yes. Do you think that we in the West really understand the depth of feeling that there is among the Iranian expat community?
I don't think so. I think you've been taken by surprise, and there are many reasons for it. For the longest time, the Western media, they were, looking at Iran and what was going on through the prism of their proxies out in the West. Of getting access to Iran meant that they had to be friendly, or if they would visit Iran, they had to go with guides from the Ministry of Culture. And the Iranians, really, ordinary Iranians, those that you saw in the streets in January, that went out knowing that they would be killed. Many of them don't speak English. Many of them don't have the luxuries that others out, in the northern part of Tehran, traveling internationally, being on Instagram, being influencers. They never had that luxury. And certainly I think the West, even today, has been taken by surprise.
Edward, do you think that, by the way, 0345 6060 973, if you want to ask our 2 guests a question. Do you think that, given what Marco Rubio has said there, that there is actually a plan here? That there is an end game for the Trump administration and for Netanyahu, not just weakening Iran, but knowing what they want to achieve in a month's time, or 3 months' time, or 6 months' time, because that's always been the problem when these things have happened before, and there doesn't seem to have been an end game.
I suspect there's a better understanding in Tel Aviv than Washington, D.C. But I couldn't absolutely substantiate that, other than President Trump has been a bit evasive about exactly what the end state is and how long it will take. He may hide behind, this is constructive ambiguity and people can't pin me down and they don't know what I'll do. But I also am pretty sure the Israeli intelligence penetration of the Iranian regime has been quite extraordinary. And I suspect they have a much better idea, and Nazanin will be able to talk more about this, as to exactly what may take the place of the current regime if indeed it is decapitated. After all, Israel has to live in that part of the world afterwards. It is a great gamble for Trump, because he has put a lot of American might behind this, and he will not be able to control events on the ground. Spectacular gamble, really.
Nazanin, do you think there is a plan? And what would you like the plan to be? I mean, what would you like to see as the end game?
I would like to see an Iran with a responsible leadership, with an outlook that represents the aspirations of its people. Certainly a state that is at peace inside and at peace with its neighbors and the international community, that has free and fair open elections, that the mosque is separated from the state, and that at the end of the day, individual rights and human rights are respected. And this is not what we have today. Today, what we have had for the past 47 years in Iran, is a state that whose understanding of interest has not been national interest, but rather the Islamic Republic's interest. And they've had an outlook, an ideological, theocratic outlook, that is in total contradiction to what Iranians aspire to now. So certainly there are, at the moment, when you look at the one name that is being called out on the streets of Iran, and also more than millions of people in UK, Germany, France, Canada, United States are calling out as a transitional leader. And so there is...
You mean...
Yes, Reza Pahlavi. People have given their lives inside Iran calling out his name. So certainly the sooner the international community accepts that and this transitional process, the sooner the war will be over.
There is a problem there, isn't there? Because, I mean, even if, say, 85% of the Iranian people are against the current regime and they want change, that still leaves the IRGC adherents there. It still leaves those who supported the Ayatollahs and want to continue with theocracy. They're not going anywhere. They'll still be there. So how confident can you be that an interim regime could effectively impose its will against those who've been holding the power and influence?
Well, what you are seeing now is that the IRGC and its loyal elements are in a war. They're on a suicidal mission. Mr. Khamenei had always said that, they're following, as the UK Prime Minister referred to in his last speech, of the scorched earth view of the world, that if they're not there, they will, won't leave anything behind. So this is their mindset. So the sooner this transitional system is accepted and recognized, it will facilitate defections. And that's what you need. And I think it's more to do about political solutions rather than only military. It should be, I think, a combination. But then I'm a journalist. These are my ideals.
Okay. Right. We're going to come to your calls and your WhatsApp questions in just a moment. 0345 6060 973, or you can text your question to 84850. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 18 minutes past 9.
Conflict in the Middle East. Follow live on LBC.
A Southern
Dale on LBC.
9:20 on LBC. It's a Q&A hour in this hour. We have two guests with us, Nazanin Ansari, who is an Iranian journalist. She's a managing editor of the Persian language news website Kayhan London and the English version Kayhan Life, and Air Vice Marshal Edward Stringer. So he's here if you want to ask anything about the military actions here. You can also ask about the political questions, because obviously, Keir Starmer's come in for quite a lot of criticism over the last few days, not least from me, about his reaction to this and not giving the Americans permission to use UK bases, although that has come belatedly, but only for defensive actions. Right, let's go to our first caller. It's Tyler in Leeds, who we haven't heard from for weeks. Tyler, where have you been?
Oh, here, there and everywhere, as it were. But good evening, Mr. Dale and panel. My question is, obviously, one of the big concerns right now is all of the oil tankers stuck in the Strait of Hormuz. I was wondering, is there actually an opportunity here for, Donald Trump has said the war might go on for several weeks. Will areas like China start decoupling from Iran's oil markets, and will they start buying from poorer countries in Africa and Asia? Because that might then allow these poorer countries to have more money in their state revenues to invest in like business support or oil well construction or water well construction and things like that. Because obviously Iran exports a lot of oil, and because of the disruption, might this actually be an economic opportunity if we think more pragmatically about things? But yeah, thank you.
Nazanin, do you want to take that? You're almost shaking your head.
That is a very good question.
It is a good question.
And I don't know where China would buy its oil. Certainly, they've been buying Iranian oil at really, really low prices. In a sense, the Islamic Republic has been paying dearly both to China and Russia what it needed, the money that it needed to spend in Iran for the sake of its ideology. Now, where would China turn to? That remains to be seen.
Well, it won't be Venezuela, will it?
Certainly not.
You see, this is a conspiracy theory here, Edward, in that some people are suggesting, well, this is a deflection for Donald Trump from the Epstein files, but other people are saying, well, it's all about oil. Not oil that America necessarily wants for itself from Iran, but if Iran becomes a democracy or there's a new regime, they're not going to necessarily be benevolent towards China or Russia. So there's a sort of geopolitical aspect to this as well.
Yes, very much. You should have had this question on your previous panel, actually, shouldn't you? Given what Kat said about LNG production. I think the first thing to say, I think there's quite a lot of oil afloat at the moment, isn't there, around the world? There is actually a bit of a glut in the market. They're not expecting this. I've not checked the exact figures today. But yes, there is...
Well, the fact that the oil price has only gone up 10% in the last 3 days, I think that's indicative that you're probably right.
Yeah, I think there's a whole load of oil that's essentially being stored in super tankers around the world trying to find a market. So I don't think there's going to be, as you just said, an immediate shock. But yes, certainly, you think through Venezuela, Iran sponsored a heck of a lot was going on in Venezuela. Venezuelan oil went that way. Here there is an attempt here to dismantle the petrochemical underpinnings of the crinks. Quite how much that features as an overall desire, or whether it's an accidental but beneficial side effect, I don't know where the thinking is in Washington.
Right. Excuse me. Let's take a text question from Olad, who says, Iain, we're only getting one side on US-Israel versus Iran. The sanctions aren't just pressure, they're economic warfare directly harming millions of ordinary Iranians. Then we act surprised when they resent us. Most Iranian callers to LBC are from the diaspora, bitter exiles who never got over the Shah's overthrow. They're completely biased and delusional if they think they speak for the majority inside Iran. They're also dismissive of any suggestion this could lead to bloody civil war. Their only counter-argument is we're not Arab and not Sunni, which is almost racist and ignores the complex reality on the ground. Well, Nazanin, get your teeth into that one.
It's funny. He thinks he knows more about Iran than we do. Certainly not. And I don't know where he gets his information, whether he reads Persian, whether he reads and listens to what's going on inside Iran. Does he know that over 36,000 people were killed in 2 nights? And I think they know much better what's going on in Iran than either Olad does, or certainly, yes, of course, I have not been to Iran for 47 years. Yes, of course, I've always been against the revolution because I've never been for violence and I've never been for theocracy. And I've always wanted Iran as part of a positive member of the international community. I remember Iran at its heyday, when it actually at the UN headed the first Human Rights Council, and it was a woman who headed that, and it was representative of Iran. And I remember when the United Nations decided to have to celebrate the achievements of women and have anniversaries for every year for women's achievements. It was Iran that headed the advisory council. So, yes, I remember all of those, and I celebrate all of those. And many Iranians inside, I mean, that's what they want. That's why a lot of them who are calling for Reza Shah, for Reza Pahlavi, is because of what they remember the best days of Iran. It was 25 years, mind you.
But it was a very corrupt regime, wasn't it?
Corrupt in what sense? In the sense of the Islamic Republic, where it sends billions.
Oh, two wrongs don't make a right.
No, but what corruption? When you look at what had happened, where after the revolution, what happened to the people who were the technocrats there, or the generals, or what was their life? So even they went after, they tried to go after finding the millions that the Shah allegedly had taken out, but they couldn't find anything. Instead, he had set up a foundation, the Pahlavi Foundation, that the Islamic regime took over. They signed over to the Islamic Republic, and from then on, the United States...
But there was corruption, there was repression, there was a secret police. I mean, sometimes I think people who remember these days with sort of slightly rose-tinted spectacles.
The level of corruption is the level of corruption you see even here in the UK.
Surely not.
Or in the United States. I mean...
Martin, who's in? Martin?
Hi, Ian. Hello, all panel and the listeners. I moved back to Poland, so I operator. But I have definitely a question for a Vice Marshal on the topic, which you're asking, but I just want to respond quickly, if you allow me to, what Irene just said. I'm Polish, and I remember a few things from Iran. It's always in the books that Iran was the country which helped Polish army, which escaped, which was released from Russian lagers during Second World War. They helped us to transport.
Martin, I do need you to get to a question.
Yes, of course. So the question to the Vice Marshal. Russia is being connected to Iran and vice versa. They've been supporting each other. My question is, how do you think it will affect the relationships, transfers of the weapons like anti-air S-300s, S-400 systems, and vice versa, Shahid drones? I mean, is there an hope for Ukraine to actually look at this situation in the bright side? And all the best to Iran.
Okay. Edward.
Well, it's going to put a great strain on it, which ultimately will be beneficial to our efforts in Ukraine. I think there's evidence that Iran was looking for some support from Russia and it was not forthcoming. Though I'm part of the policy exchange writing team that wrote a pamphlet against using the term Global South, I'll use it now. I think the Global South will look at that and realise that, as with Assad, Russia isn't necessarily the most reliable partner, and therefore I think this will strain those bonds. And of course, Iran is going to be weaker coming out of it, in whichever shape it comes out of it, and therefore not as well placed as it was before. A few years back, perhaps in its confident pomp in thinking it could support Russia in its illegal war against Ukraine.
Okay, right. We'll take some more questions in just a few moments' time. 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp your question on that number or text 84850. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 9:30 and let's get the news headlines with Daryl Jackson.
The White House insists the US has clear objectives for war on Iran, including destroying Iranian missiles and preventing Tehran from ever obtaining nuclear weapons. The conflict in the Middle East is escalating, with Israel exchanging strikes with Iranian-backed Hezbollah militants in Lebanon. Iran's issued a warning that ships will be set on fire after announcing the strategically important Strait of Hormuz has been closed. Earlier, Donald Trump criticised the Prime Minister for taking too long to change his mind and allow America to strike Iran from a joint airbase in the Chagos Islands. Sir Keir Starmer defended his decision and doubled down on his choice not to join the US-Israeli offensive but continue acting defensively. Limited flights from Dubai are resuming as the Prime Minister says Britain's looking at all options to support its citizens stuck in the Middle East. LBC weather: rain slowly pushing east this evening, gradually weakening. Cold and frosty in the north, lows between -2 and 8 degrees.
This is LBC.
Amazon
Is LBC with Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973.
9:33 on LBC. We're taking your questions and your calls and your WhatsApp messages and your texts on what's going on in Iran. If you've got a question for our experts, they are Nazanin Ansari, an Iranian journalist, who's the managing editor of Kayhan London and Kayhan Life, Air Marshal Edward Stringer, who's not a vice, as a previous caller said. I'm sure he'd like some. Former Director General of Joint Forces Development at the UK Strategic Command, and also previously the Assistant Chief of the Air Staff in the Royal Air Force. So we've got a sort of range of expertise here. So if you'd like to ask them a question, do give us a call. Michael says, what level of firepower do the Gulf states have to defend themselves against Iran? Do your experts see the Gulf states getting involved on the Allied side? That's an interesting question, because I'm slightly perplexed as to why Iran has launched missiles and drones against 15 different countries, some of whom have been its allies in the past.
I think it's hoping that they will put pressure on principally the US to bring the whole thing to a speedy conclusion and ramp it down. I'm not sure that will be the conclusion. How much firepower do they have? Well, it's interesting, but just look at one. Saudi Arabia has overtaken us on the how much it spends on arms per year, but even smaller states like the UAE, Qatar, have got significant militaries, and they've been investing in the weaponry behind the stockpiles. So actually they have got quite a lot of firepower. I think you will see that deployed defensively for a range of reasons in the first instance. And I think the GCC states, those Gulf states, all of which were quoted today by Hegseth and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs as being a part of this coalition effort, which obviously is politically attractive for the Americans, but they made the point that they're actually involved in the defensive operation at the moment, shooting down drones and missiles. And I think that they will stay doing that for quite a while. We'll then see how this develops, and if the Iranians carry on or indeed escalate the attacks, then you may see them become more offensive in nature. At the moment, I think they will just continue to try and build a shield around themselves and join the defensive effort.
It would be quite something to see Saudi Gulf state planes attacking Iran alongside Israeli planes, wouldn't it? I mean, that would have been, even a short time ago, that would have appeared fanciful, but it's no longer fanciful, is it?
Well, it's not been fanciful since the Abrahamic Accords started to pull folk together. And then, of course, the tensions around Gaza and what have you started to pull that apart. Principally, as you just said, that's one of the reasons why I think the Gulf states would be happy to see others do the work for them. But it's not unforeseeable. And, of course, that then shifts the whole politics of the region afterwards, does it not?
Well, indeed. And, I mean, that I think... I mean, I've got no idea how this is going to turn out, but the ideal way it turns out, I guess, is for Iran to become some sort of democracy or a very different regime to what it is now, and becomes part of the family of nations again, and brings peace to the entire Middle East. I mean, I don't know if that's being too idealistic, doesn't it?
No, not at all. It is a possibility, and it is certainly a probability as soon as there's a political decision to ensure that the transition takes place as soon as possible. But certainly, the Islamic Republic has, even until last week, news was emerging that they had basically thought of 3-4 different layers after this leadership has been eliminated. And that is one reason that we are seeing them still continuing sending the missiles, attacking, and it's a bully ideology. It's a psychopathic ideology. And for years, the international community has been trying to soften it, to change its behavior. But it has not been a normal country. It has not been a normal regime.
So are you saying that almost the entire Iranian political leadership has now been wiped out? And because I was reading an article over the weekend where someone was saying that all of these drones and bombs or missiles that are being sent by Iran, they're all being sent unilaterally by the IRGC, that it's not the political leaders who are ordering this because there aren't any anymore.
No, there are still layers left.
But not at the top level, though.
The decision-making is of sending out the missiles is not being taken by the president, for sure. He couldn't even run the country. But it is being taken by IRGC commanders. And we talked about Russia, we talked about China. For example, when they sent their drones technology to Russia, the Shahid, to be used in Ukraine, the Russians were using it, and they just took the technology, adapted it, and Iran was not getting anything in return. And all the money, and they don't even have the technology themselves now. So the factories are in Russia. So that is the danger as well for Russia and in a way China to get involved, but Russia mainly.
Okay. Right, a question here from Stafford, who says, why has our government not proscribed the IRGC, and why is the Iranian ambassador not being kicked out?
I agree. That is one political decision. That is one non-military action that the British government can take that will define the trajectory of this confrontation.
And why haven't they done it?
Why haven't they done it?
Edward, got an answer to that?
Well, my longest job description ever that you read out earlier on, Ian, the one you missed was it's an alphabet soup, but what it meant was Director of Operations, which I was 15 through 17. And of course, the JICPOA started that period in 2015, after a period where we had worried about what's called third-party attack. So steeped in all of this, my question to my Foreign Office colleagues at the time, who were full of the JICPOA, this agreement with Iran, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, was what happens 10 years' time when we get to the sunset clauses? And they said, well, we'll have a moderate government then. And I would say, well, why? What are you going to do in the 10 years between? And there wasn't so much forthcoming on that.
Oh, you mean in Iran, not this country?
Well, yes, I shall leave that one to you. But my point about this is that there was this sense that jaw is an end in itself. And whereas the foreign officers look at the MOD and say, well, you're the sort of hammer that sees every problem's a military nail, and you're looking for a military solution. Sometimes there aren't always diplomatic solutions. And I think there's always been a desire to keep a dialogue going, even with this, terribly dreadful regime, and almost a desire to keep our embassy open, in Tehran, so we can facilitate this. So there actually comes a point, and I agree with you, where we have to turn around and say, no, enough is enough. We cannot. This dialogue isn't getting us anywhere. The IGRC is, a dreadful terrorist sponsoring organisation, and I am one of those that would like to see it.
I think that the justification that the government has given is that, there has to be a change in the law for this to happen, because it's a state organisation, and therefore it can't be described as a terror organisation. I mean, to me, that's sort of splitting hairs. And if you want to do something, you then change the law. I
think the problem goes much deeper. It is when think tanks stop thinking beyond their little silos and boxes. I think for the longest time, those advising the government, those advising the Foreign Office, have tried to maintain their own connections because they didn't think there would be an alternative to this system. And it's best to carry on and wait for a moderate to come, not realizing that the essence, that the nature of this regime is psychopathic. Look how it treats its own people.
Because every time there has been a new leader, a new president, they're described as reformist or moderate. But reformist and moderate in Iran doesn't quite match what our definitions of that would be, do they?
Certainly not. And when you look at the constitution of the Islamic Republic, when you look at its laws, the parameters that legal parameters that it allows, change to take place, you do see that at the end of the day, it is a theocracy and in this theocracy and this, it is Ayatollah Khamenei is Shiite, but many Shiite leaders who are unfortunately still very silent, even now, do not subscribe to his way of thinking. And at the end of the day, I do remember many who are no longer with us, thinkers and statesmen, who were saying there will come a time when you look back at this period of Iran's history and you will see a sect of Islam having taken control. And so this is what we've had. And their religious philosophers, Sayyid Ali Qutb, and more religious experts know more about it than I do. They go back to a very, very Islamist way of thinking, of very Taliban-like. And that was Mr. Khamenei's source of emulation. So as long as this type of thinking, fatalist thinking, is there, you will have this type of behavior.
Another question here from Heidi, who says, can you ask if there are any parallels that can be drawn for the Americans encouraging the Kurds to rise up against Saddam Hussein and Trump encouraging the Iranians to rise up? Edward?
Well, yes, I was there at the time. Well, I hope there won't be parallels, but sadly, you can see them, and it's tempting to think that if you put the might of a Western coalition behind forces on the ground and they'll be able to do something, but it takes a heck of a lot to rise up against a violent autocratic regime with forces of repression. And I do hope that Mr. Trump has not been firing from the hip here and has thought about that.
Because the problem is, Nazanin, that we've been here before, haven't we? When, what was it, 2008, 2009, when there was a school of thought that America would, if there was a uprising, that America would then intervene, and they didn't. And I think this has happened 3 or 4 times. And if it doesn't happen this time, I mean, what does that mean?
Certainly, there is that kind of a comparison to be made. But Iran is not Iraq. Iran is not Syria. Iran has been a country in existence in its current format. Not certainly within these borders, it was much bigger, for thousands of years. And it's when we have seen Iranians, we are diverse culturally, we're diverse religiously, in all the uprisings, everything. The Islamic Republic has tried to divide and conquer, that's true. But when people are getting together, you talked about 2022, it was Mahsa Jina Amini, who was a Kurdish origin, Iranian Kurd. Iranians were shouting from Kurdistan to Baluchistan to Khuzestan, my life only for Iran. So we have a history that goes back, and certainly since 2000, we have seen this level, this change in the society itself taking place, and technology has helped. Internet has helped, social media has helped for Iranians to go back and look at their days of glory, and that was Cyrus the Great. And in a way, this might be I'm going on a tangent, but in 2000, in the year 2000, around 2000, they learned that the central government was going to build a dam that would submerge Persepolis and Pasargad, that were the seat of power of the Achaemenid kings, underwater. The same thing that they did in Egypt and for the Sphinx. They had such a plan. What happened was that the civil society got up and it started activities saying that these are our heritage, this is our Persian heritage, and to the extent that they even UNESCO recognized Pasargad as a UNESCO heritage site, and people started gathering around this tomb of Cyrus the Great. And it also, in a way, coincided with what Mr. Ahmadinejad and them were wanting to do with the nuclear, saying that we are great, we're a nation of Cyrus. And they even called, they even made the day that Cyrus entered Babylonia and set the slaves free as the day of Cyrus. So we've had Iranians every year for the past more than 10, 15 years gather at this tomb of Cyrus the Great. This identity that they are no longer identify as an Islamic nation, but as a Persian nation, Iranian nation, with its aspirations that go back to Cyrus the Great. Okay. This is the identity of modern Iran. And this is where the Islamic Republic, that is why it has lost its legitimacy. It no longer identifies with the aspirations of the people.
Right, we will take more questions in a moment. 0345 6060 973. It's 9:48.
Coming up at 10 on LBC, Ben Kentish.
As the crisis in the Middle East deepens tonight, we'll bring you the very latest developments. Plus, Keir Starmer insists he was right to stop British bases being used in the bombings. But do you agree?
Ben Kentish at 10. Listen on our free Global Player app or the LBC app. on LBC.
9:51 on LBC. Nazanin Ansari and Air Marshal Edward Stringer with me answering your questions. Let's go to Rizwan, who's a first-time caller in Newham. Hello, Rizwan.
Hi, Ian. I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller. I wanted to speak about what's called Mark Carney's speech at the World Economic Forum. And if you guys recall, where I think it was a monumental speech, a speech to go down in history, where obviously Canada's been likened as the 51st state, and he went on and said, for a long time we've turned our eyes, we've played the game, we've followed, and we know we've benefited from that. We know that there's been injustices that have happened across the world, but because it benefited us, we turned an eye on that. We didn't focus on it. And everyone rallied behind Greenland, all of the West. Trump's a madman. What's he doing, etc., etc. Now we see that the heat's away from Greenland. It's back onto the Middle East. And what's happening with Israel and America, what they're doing to Iran is illegal. And it doesn't matter how despotic, how tyrannical the government may be. It's the same story again and again. Might is right. And then we get domestic strife with immigrants coming over, etc., etc. We play a nasty game across the world, and then we reap what we sow. And I want to know what the expert view is on that, Mark Carney's speech, and whether she's aware, because she's a journalist, right?
Well, this was at the Munich Security Conference that you're talking about, and I think it was an important speech, and he questioned the international order, he questioned the value of international law in many ways. Edward, what do you make of what Rizwan's just said?
Well, interestingly, Mark Carney's come out in support.
Yeah.
Of this. It was very much a lauded speech. I remember commenting on it at the time and saying, but where is the beef? He talked about the middle powers and how they should come together. And where I would, sorry Rizwan, but I would take slight issue, because I think he also said, by and large, even though the rules-based international order did rather favour the West, mostly it was trying to do the right thing most of the time. What he was saying now is there's a rupture in that, and the middle powers would have to work out how they were going to work together to support a rule-based international order to prevent might being right all the time. But I think what it reminded everybody was, you can have a rule-based international order, you can have an idea, a framework of international law, but in some ways it's always subject to politics, and the more existential the questions for states, the more they are going to exert the power that they have. What Carney was saying was the middle powers need to work out how they can coalesce to exert the sort of power that their economies and their aggregate population suggests they should be able to do.
Rizwan, thank you. Let's take this from Sue. This is directed at you, Nazanin. I'd like to know whether this ageing Ayatollah in frail health was really running the country, or was he just there in name only while the main responsibilities were delegated? If so, what was the point of it all?
Well, all the decisions with the buck stopped with him. He was the one who decided whether to basically have direct negotiations with the United States or not. Even before he had died, he was against having direct negotiations. So although, and that was one of the reasons that basically the government had stopped functioning inside Iran, because he was against many of the decisions that would be to the benefit to keep, to make Iran a functioning state. But if I may just address what your previous caller said about this illegal act, in 2005, there was a UN-endorsed global commitment, and that's responsibility to act, when states commit crimes against humanity or genocide. And we saw that emerge after Rwanda. And certainly what happened January 8 and January 9, where figures between 12,000 to 40,000 people were mowed down on the streets in 2 nights. The UN rapporteur, many of the legal scholars believe that it was crime against humanity. And so, whereas your caller regards this as intervention, many Iranians, that's why they're so happy and content. They see that they're defenseless, facing a regime, a psychopathic regime with arms that had even also promised that if it was going to kill 1 million Iranians, it would do so as long as the regime would survive. And in a way, this is the international community's responsibility to act for a better future for not only Iran, but the Middle East and the international community.
I mean, I think when Rizwan said, well, this is clearly illegal, there are very many amateur lawyers here who believe that they seem to know what international law says on this. And as you've just articulated, I think there are many ways you can argue that this was legal, or you can argue that it was illegal. In a way, it doesn't get us anywhere, does it? We've only got literally a minute left. Nazanin, are you optimistic that there will be a meaningful change which will mean that you can actually go back to Iran and visit?
I am very optimistic as long as the West takes the right decisions.
That's not a ringing endorsement, is it?
No, I remain hopeful, and they have.
And Edward?
I hope you are right. I am not sure all the pieces were put in place beforehand, and I go back to my point, for Trump, this is a big gamble.
Well, Tessa Dunlop and I have been talking about this on our Where Politics Meets History podcast, which will be live at 1 a.m. in the morning. It was quite a spicy discussion, as you might expect, so I hope you'll give that a listen. You can download that on Global Player or wherever you get your podcasts from. Well, thanks for all of your calls and messages this evening. I'll be back tomorrow from 7. If you missed any of this evening's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news, videos and opinions. Thank you both very much indeed for coming into the studio this evening and spending an hour with us. Coming up at 1 on LBC, it's James Hansen. But right now, it's Ben Kentish.
Iain, thank you very much indeed. Hello there. A very good evening to you. Ben Kentish here with you on LBC this Monday evening. Coming up.
Any UK actions must always have a lawful basis and a viable, thought-through plan.
As the war in the Middle East intensifies tonight with more airstrikes, today something we haven't seen in a very long time, a public spat between a US president and a British Prime Minister. It started when Donald Trump said he was